Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's episode of Drink and Draw Social Club with a very, very special guest, the one, the only Mr. Walt Simonson.
Woo!
Yay! Very glad to see all of you. So, welcome, Walt. We're glad to have you with us here tonight.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Walt, Walt, we needed you here because we had to, we had Shake It On and he sullied this thing completely.
Yeah.
So,
yes,
so
but
we needed
it was far more entertaining than I'm.
No, we needed a class act. We needed somebody to come in here and clean this place up a little bit because, boy, it's been a mess.
Oh, that would be me, sure.
He was talking smack about everybody. It was,
Shocking.
Well, you've known.
Drives Howard nuts because Howard knows I'm as venal as he is. But I do it all behind closed doors, so everybody thinks I'm the nicest guy in comics. But really, I'm just as evil as Howard is. But I won't be doing it here on camera either.
Great. That's wise. You and Howard have known each other. You guys all lived in the same building way back in the day, right?
We did. I actually met Howard before I got into comics. We were at there was a convention in Washington, D.C. that Gary Groth put on back way before the Comics Journal. He was from down there, and he had a convention. I lived in that area, and Howard came down for the con. He was just getting into comics. I had not started yet. And we showed each other our work and talked. And then the first day I went into New York to try and get into comics a year and a half later, I talked to a couple of editors at DC. I showed them my samples. They were very kind, and they said, well, this is very nice. What else can you do? And I thought, oh, no, I'm doomed. I'll be working at McDonald's the rest of my life. And I went down to they had a coffee room back at the time. I think maybe floor space in New York wasn't quite so expensive as it is now. And I walked into the coffee room, and Bernie Wrightson and Michael Kaluta and Howard Chaykin and Dan Green were all sitting around a table shooting the breeze.
Wow.
And I knew Howard, and I knew Bernie's work, and I probably knew a little Michael's work. Dan's I didn't know at the time. And so, they were about my age, a little young, just a shade younger. So he sat down, shot the breeze. They said, what are you doing here? I said, well, I kind of want to get into comics, but I'm not looking good. And Michael took my portfolio, which was a book of the Star Slammers, a science fiction comic I had done at art school. And I had written it, penciled it, inked it, and lettered it. It was in. Oh, look at you! It was in black and white. And he took it and he said, look through it. And he said, well, let me show it to this guy behind us. There was this old guy behind us, and by old, I mean probably 30 years younger than I am now. But at the time, he seemed like an old guy. And it turned out to be Jack Adler, who was a second in command of production back in the day. And Jack looked it over, and Jack liked it. He said, well, let me go show this to Carmine. And Carmine Infantino was I don't know if he was the publisher, the editor-in-chief, the editorial director. He was the main guy. And I knew his stuff. I knew Carmine's. I'd read Adam Strange and The Flash and stuff. So Jack took it off, and I sat there talking with the other guys a little nervously. And finally, Jack came back in almost at the dead run, and he said, Carmine wants to see it, let's go, as if it were one word.
Wow.
And I found myself in Carmine's office. I don't remember our discussion at all, except for
Me Too. This isn't going to be This isn't a Me Too sort of thing, is it?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Right, good.
So he did ask me if I was influenced by Bernie Krigstein, and at the time I hadn't really seen Krigstein's work, but my work was very linear and very designy, and I can see in retrospect why he would wonder about that. Anyway, he liked my stuff, so he called in 3 of his editors, and he made them all give me a job. I mean, they were all short stories. Back then, Marvel and DC both had short stories, and that was often where new guys broke in. You kind of, you could do crappy work, but there'd be a really beautiful Alex Toth story up in the front. So you learned your craft, and you got paid a few bucks, and that was how that worked out for me. So I was a lucky guy.
Nice.
I think
Do you remember
somewhere else, but I forget where it was. Doesn't matter.
Do you remember what those first stories were?
Sure. First story was a story that Joe Orlando went and got. It was Orlando, Julia Schwartz, and Archie Goodwin were the 3 editors he called in. And Orlando got me first. He had Len didn't agree with my version of this story, but he's not here anymore, so he's wrong. So Joe had a story, an inventory story in his drawer. And so he went and he pulled out of the drawer. It's called Cyrano's Army. and it was a weird war story. It was like living stone gargoyles, and they fought the Nazis and stuff like that. And I don't know, 6-8 pages long. It was a short story. So that was the first story I did. On that one, I penciled, ink, and lettered. And then Archie gave me a story, a science fiction story, short one, that a friend of mine wrote called UFM, which meant the Ultimate Fighting Machine. Do you guys know Fred Saberhagen's work, the writer? Fred Saberhagen?
The sword stuff.
Yeah, he wrote a series of stories about berserkers, the Berserker Machines, which were, well, everybody knows, well, not everybody, but a lot of people know the stories of Star Trek with I forget, the Doomsday Machine, which is a giant tree stump that floats around in space and eats planets. And that's where what the Berserkers were. They were before the Star Trek. And they were intelligent machines the size of, half the size of planets. And they would find life and they would destroy it. That was their job. They're like Terminators now, but their job was to destroy it. So this story was really our take on a machine that was kind of a berserker. And so Archie kept feeding me a few stories. And Julie and I like Julie, but clearly the work I was doing was not work he was interested in. It wouldn't have been work he would ever have hired me for. And the story was, should I tell this story? Sure, what the heck. The story was...
He's dead too, so it's okay.
It was so DC for that time, and for Julie, it was how Kryptonians got headbands.
What?
So, and it was like, some guy bumped his head and he put a headband on, and they all went, wow, that looks great. And they all wore headbands. That's not really it. I don't remember the story, but I was a Marvel reader at the time when I came to New York, but at that time, early 70s, Marvel wasn't doing very interesting comics. They were redoing a lot of their old stuff. Galactus came back for the third time, and the Wizard came back for the fourth time, and the Thing became a bad guy again. So I ended up going to DC first because they were doing, they had like the Creeper and Enemy Ace and a lot of other things, none of which ran very long, but they were pretty cool comics. So that's why I went there first. So I ended up, Julie gave me this story, which was, showed me the script, which was, as I said, it was a really classic, old-fashioned DC story. Nowadays, I might have a different idea about more comics for kids and doing something like that. But at the time, I just thought, holy cow, this is the kind of comic I never wanted to do. And so essentially, Archie kept feeding me small jobs, and I never mentioned the story to Julie, and he never mentioned it to me again. I think eventually Dave Cockrum drew it, and Dave was probably the right guy for that job. So that was and then eventually after 6 months in the business, Archie asked me if I would be interested in drawing a news strip he was going to be doing in the back of Detective Comics called Manhunter. And that was my first regular gig. I said, sure. So we began doing Manhunter together. Before I started that, wow, you're on it. Before I started that, I've been in the business 6 months, one more young guy doing comics. And the book, the comic was well-known professionally, really before fandom and the kind of fandom we have now. But it was well-known professionally. It won some awards. And ultimately, when that was done about a year later, all the professionals, the editors, and the other artists and writers in comics all knew who I was. And I didn't have to really go searching for work after that. So that was my break moment.
At what point were you doing this, Walt?
Probably Metal Men was probably, I can't remember now if it was before or after. Probably before Hercules Unbound. So probably not long after the Metal Men, 6 months. I did a little work for. I like that splash. I did a little work for Atlas Seaboard because they came into existence, and they couldn't get anybody to work for them much, so they were paying double rate, and that meant that my rate went from $55 a page for pencils and inks to $110. And I was good with that, and I was also young enough; it didn't really matter. The older artists did not want to leave the established companies because they were afraid they would lose their jobs and be cut out. Yeah. So I did those. Then the Metal Men came up. Steve Gerber had written an inventory issue of the Metal Men that wasn't being published at that time. And Carmine approached me about drawing the issue. And I thought, I liked the Metal Men. I read them back when I was, high school. So I said, sure. So it was a good story. Steve, great writer. And I drew it. And Carmine liked it so much, he made it a regular book. Oh, wow. But by that time, Steve had gone back to Marvel. So Jerry Conway did that. He was at DC then. People used to hop back and forth all the time, especially young guys. and he wrote 2 issues, and then he went back to Marvel, and Marty Pasco wrote 2 issues.
Looks like
And
you
after 5 issues bi-monthly with 3 different writers, I was kind of tired because every writer you have to readjust to, and so I bowed out after 5 issues. But it took me almost a year to do them, and I liked them. It was a fun book to do.
It's nice that they were like fairly early on in your career. You're already plotting some of the work that you're doing, which is kind of unusual for most artists.
Well, I learned. There are a couple of things going on. One is I learned a lot from Archie. When people ask who your big influences are, I think of my art influences, but I often forget to bring in Archie as one of my major writing influences. I'm not as good by a long shot, but he taught me a great deal. And in the later Manhunters, the last 1 or 2, maybe 3, we were, I would not say co-plotting. Archie was doing the bulk of the work, but I'd go over to his place, his apartment for dinner. His wife, Ann, was very generous to me. And so I would stay there for dinner very frequently. I'm sure it's all that kept me alive my first year in New York. I was a crap cook, a lot of hamburger helper, stuff like that. And so I got a couple of good square meals a week. And we would plot the story. Now we would talk about it. The one thing I will say about it, and this was not part of the plot, I mean, a serious part of the plotting, but the 5th chapter, which is Cathedral Perilous, has a young boy named Nico, which is short for Nicholas, in it. And what that was really about, I wanted to draw St. Bartholomew's in New York, which is a big Episcopal cathedral in New York. It's really beautiful. It's on Park Avenue in the 50s. I wanted to draw that. And I had a really good friend who, a little younger than I am, had a young brother. I don't know if he was even 12 yet. And he had been killed in a boating accident, very tragically. And he had read comics. And my friend said, you ever get a chance to put Nico in a story, he would have loved it. And I thought, I can do that. And so I talked to Archie, and Archie said, sure. So we worked. It turned out Nico became not just a walk-on part, but a crucial element in that story. So that was one where I added some stuff, and Archie was able to build a story around it. And other times we would talk about stuff and try to work things out. But I was lucky. I kind of kibitz. Some writers wanted, they weren't interested in getting much help, and I might have contributed 5%, if that. Other writers were delighted to have me pitch in and throw around ideas. And so by the time I actually got a gig as a writer, I had at least done some plotting and a little bit of scripting. Not a couple of pages is all. But
was that a clincher for? Did something come before Thor as far as a regular series writer?
Yeah, Battlestar Galactica. That was my first writing. I did Battlestar when it came up on the. It was on TV for a while. The comic ran longer than the TV show, and I did some of them. I drew about half of the run. It was about a 22-issue run, I suppose. And when I did that, part of the way through, maybe issue 17 or 18, somewhere in there, Roger Mackenzie had been writing it, got off the book. And Wheezy, my wife, was the editor. So this is nepotism at its finest. She asked me if I wanted to write the book. And the book, it was not selling very well. So it was a great place to start, because if it really, if I wrote it and it sucked and it tanked, well, they just say, well, it was not doing very well, so it's okay. We don't have to worry about Walt. And if it did well, or at least it didn't do well, it still didn't do well, but a lot of people liked it. And Archie was walking in the hall. By that time, he was at Marvel, walking in the hall and told me how much he liked what I was doing on it. The book died after I did 4 of the last 5 issues. And then it died. And then Archie caught me in the hall one day and he said, look, I've got a movie I'm supposed to write an adaptation for. I'm just too busy. I just can't do it. John Buscema's drawing it. Klaus Jansen's inking it. It's something called Raiders of the Lost Ark. You want to write the adaptation in 3 issues? And I said, nobody knew what it was. I said, oh, yeah, sure. What the heck? Script's already there. Easy for me. And so I did that. And right after that, Mark Grunwald, I talked about Thor to Mark several times. And so he knew I liked the character and I had some ideas for it. And so he offered me the book. Oh, and I did a graphic novel, The Star Slammers, in there as well, which I also wrote, which is about 3 comics long. And that means when I took over Thor, I had done, let's say 4 Galacticas, 3, I have to use my fingers to count, 3 Star Slammers roughly, and a couple of others. So I'd written maybe 8, 9, 10, maybe 11 comics or so by the time I got Thor. So I was really a new writer. I was a fledgling writer when Thor got dropped in my lap. And like Battlestar Galactica, it wasn't doing very well. There were rumors it was going to be canceled. I don't know if those were true. But what did happen was, if it did well, they'd say, "Wow, Walt, what a genius." If it crashed, they'd go, "Well, it crashed." Nobody could save it. And it actually did pretty well. So it worked out very well for me. And I love doing that book.
Hey, Walt, what was it about Thor that made you gravitate towards the character? I mean, you clearly had a voice for the character. You wrote, and drew legendary runs on the character, created amazing characters within the pantheon of Asgard. So what was it about it that drew you to it? And by the way, can I also say, I also want to say, you could tell that Dan was really excited about having you as a guest. We don't have these kind of graphics for our guests that are timed. Usually this show is a mess. It's just like a slop house of like Albert Dorn photographs and just like.
That sounds pretty good to me, I'll tell you.
There it is. There he is.
Page of Drink and Draw right there.
Yeah.
He's the patron saint. Yeah. So I apologize. Well, but yeah. So I mean, with Thor, I mean, what was that thing that drew you? So that allowed you to. But where you felt some sort of magic was flowing through you, literally, to create this great stuff.
Well, at the time I was doing it, I was just telling stories I wanted to tell, and that was a time when I think mainstream comics is different now. You guys could correct me on this if I'm wrong, but at the time when you were given a book, you pretty much were given your head on the book. You could do what you wanted to do, and that's what I did. Mark Grunwald. This has also happened. Mark Grunwald he's my editor, gave me carte blanche on the book because the book was not selling well. He said, "Look, do whatever you want." He gave me about a page and a half of typewriting that was 5 or 6 or 7 ideas for Thor, just completely off the wall. Unfortunately, I can't find it. I must have lost it over the years, but it was just all these loony ideas, including killing the character off, having someone else, become Thor, that kind of thing. And I wasn't really into. I mean, I like the character Thor. I wasn't into killing him, so I didn't do that. I did do the thing with a hammer, but when I was a child, I discovered stories about mythology, and I loved them. I loved stories about mythological stories. I particularly like the Norse stories, probably because they all die in the end. And when you're young, death is a long way off. It can be romantic.
It's true.
When you're old, not that romantic. You might view it a little differently. It'll maybe a little darker. But I love the stories. I read several different books about them. My grandparents came from Norway on my dad's side. That's where Simonson comes from. I'm not claiming any genetic affinity on that. I really don't know. But I did love the Norse myths in particular. I like the Greek and the Roman, all that stuff. And so I was in college my freshman year, and I was in a room of one of the guys that I knew, another freshman, and there was a copy of Thor, I think it was 113, just lying around, pretty beat up, which is the return of the Grey Gargoyle. He comes back to fight Thor. And at that point, Thor, he reveals that he's Don Blake to Jane Foster. Odin gets pissed at him for the 8 billionth time, and Odin strips him of his powers. How dare he do this? So when Don tries to turn into Thor by hitting the cane, he can't do it. And about that time, the Grey Gargoyle shows up, and he knows there's some connection. So he's going to grab Don Blake or maybe threaten Jane Foster, I forget what, and is causing all kinds of trouble. And Don is trying to stay ahead of him. Of course, he's limps, so he's not very good. But he keeps out of his way for a while. It was Jack Kirby, inked by Chick Stone.
Oh.
And ultimately, there's this magic cloud kind of appears. You don't quite know what's going on. And Don Blake finally falls on the street. And the Grey Gargoyle is around the corner, but he's coming, and Don Blake's just toast. And suddenly, a Jack Kirby hand comes out of the side of the panel and grabs Don Blake's wrist. And it's wearing a Jack Kirby gauntlet, as only Jack Kirby could draw them. Right. And an off-panel balloon, or a balloon that goes off-panel, says, "Thor shall live again. You have 30 seconds. Make each one count." And he goes, wham, with the cane, and boom, turns into Thor and beats the crap out of the Grey Gargoyle in 30 seconds. And then he feels himself losing, it weakens, and he turns back into Don Blake. And then Jane Foster catches up to him, and she thinks he's just gone nuts. She didn't see any of this stuff happen. She just thinks he's nuts. and that, you know, he just was hallucinating he was Thor, trying to impress her or something. And so he retracts, says, yes, the madness has left me. I no longer think I'm Thor. And it turns out that Odin, keeping watch over all this, had sent one of his messengers, might have been Hermod, I can't remember, it wasn't a character that was used very often, to carry the power of Thor back to the Thunder God so he wouldn't be killed by the Grey Gargoyle. So I read that. I was blown away. I went, wow, it's the Norse myths in comics. I didn't care that it wasn't, you know, Thor didn't have red hair, that he wasn't wearing gauntlets, that he didn't have goats running around. I just thought, this is awesome. And I didn't care that how much of it was like the Norse myths or wasn't. And so within a few months, I located a place that sold Marvel comics. They were hard to find back then. And I began reading Thor. And within 2 or 3 or 4 months, I was reading every Marvel comic that came out. I mean, back then, that was what, 10 comic books?
Yeah, maybe.
What, 30 cents a piece, 35. Yeah. So even I was in college, I could afford them. So I became a major Marvel guy through most of the rest of the 60s. That was about 65 when I discovered that. So I loved the comic. By 67, I was writing my own story. I didn't have any plans to really draw it, but I wanted to, you know, I was inspired to write some stories, which I really hadn't done. At the time, I was a geology major. I thought I'd be doing dinosaurs in geology. So it didn't occur to me that I'd end up, you know, actually doing comic books. But I was doing the worst Stan Lee-isms you could imagine. So I think the title of the story was, For If the Odin Sword Be Drawn, or something like that. You know, hand me larger balloons, please. So I put that story in the drawer. I did actually draw a little bit when I was in art school. I drew about 20 or 30 pages of the climax. And, you know, 14 years later, Mark Grunwald asked if I wanted to do Thor for Marvel. And I pulled this old story out and I dusted it off and I put it back up and sent it out to do battle. Because my original story was that Surtur gets a hold of the Odin sword. And that the Odin sword was, in fact, Surtur's original sword. And that Odin and his brothers had stolen it so that Surtur couldn't start Ragnarok too early. I had some other stuff as well. I changed a lot of stuff. I added a lot of stuff. Beta Ray Bill was a creation of the time I was doing the book. He was not from the old days. And I was able to run with it. So I loved the character in the beginning. My 4 favorite Marvel comics were Thor, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, and Iron Man. And usually when they were Iron Man when Gene Colan was drawing him, Spidey when Steve Ditko was drawing him, Thor with Kirby, and the FF with Kirby and Sinnott. So the chance to do that book, those characters, I was thrilled. And I had a great time doing it. I don't know how it is for you guys. You do stuff, it's hard to know how it's going to be later. You know,
Sure.
I mean, I never thought about how it's going to be regarded in 35 years. Honestly, at the time, there weren't many reprints. There were no collections to speak of. You know, Stan had occasional collections of Marvel's greatest superheroes or whatever they were. The hardcovers would come out, paperback, stuff like that. But there weren't collections. When you bought the comic on a monthly basis, if you missed an issue, you were pretty much out of luck.
Yeah.
And that was just the way it was. So I did all that work with no expectation, really, of ever seeing it again.
This issue I particularly loved. I thought it was awesome. And I remember this scene in particular was very touching. I thought it was one of the, I was pretty young when this came out, but I just remembered there's something very different about it. And I think a lot of people really love that issue.
I think Kurt Busiek's told me that the last Viking story is his favorite story from my run in the book.
Yeah, it's one of mine too. It's got a lot of heart, and to me, it's always a very special issue.
Well, it was fun. I'll tell one other quick story. This also, going back to your question, Joe, is that this may have helped cement my love for Marvel Comics in that there was a tobacco shop in the college town I was at, and that's where the Marvel Comics came in. And they didn't get very many Marvel comics. They had a big spinner rack, a triple spinner rack. Not very many Marvels came in. And I bought the first 2 issues, 120 and 121, of what turned out to be a 4-issue story. The only 4-issue story Jack and Stan ever did. And it's the Absorbing Man of Loki versus Thor and Asgard and Odin. And at the end of the 2nd issue, the Absorbing Man is fighting Thor. Thor stops for a second to pull some small child out of the way of the battle because he's run into the street. And as he's doing that, and as his back, the absorbing man, of course, treacherously fires his ball and chain and clocks Thor from the back. And Thor is lying on the ground. The absorbing man has his arms in the air in a pretty small panel, saying, "Ha, only someone as strong as Thor could have beaten him." And I was not familiar with how comics work, especially continued stories. DC, which I had read when I was a little younger, mostly weren't continued stories. So I was freaking out. I was like a 19-year-old guy. I was freaking out. And then I would go to whenever I get away from class, I'd go to the comic shop, the tobacco shop. I would look for the comic, and I never found it. I never found it. Finally, enough time had gone by that I knew I had missed my chance. I knew I would never find out if Thor was still alive. So I didn't think about artists with mortgages and stuff like that. So, what do you know? So I wrote Marvel Comics a letter, which fortunately I have no copy of because I would only deeply embarrass me at this point. And I wrote to find out if I could buy a copy of Journey into Mystery 122 from them directly because I had missed it in the local store.
We have a copy of that letter.
There you go. Well, what happened was I sent it off, and then I got like 123 showed up, and I happened to be in the comic shop, the tobacco shop at the right moment, bought the comic, and I read it, and I went, well, what the hell happened in the last issue? Because it seemed like it almost came right out of the one I had read, but it was the last story. I found out how the story came out. It was the last issue. And then one day, a really pristine manila envelope shows up in my mailbox in my college. And I open it up. I don't know. I have no idea what's wrong. And it's a mint copy of Thor 122. And in the back, in it, there's a little blue card about so big. And it's pre-printed. It's this deer and there's a blank. Great to hear from you. Keep it up, true believer, Stan, or whatever. It was all printed. And somebody had written with a ballpoint pen. They wrote, "Dear Walter." And then down at the bottom, it just had in ballpoint down below it, it said, "Couldn't let you down. Hope you enjoyed the issue."
Wow.
And I went, can I say 4-letter words in this thing?
Yeah.
Of course.
Sure.
I went ape shit. I went,
whoa, language. Whoa.
sorry. I went,
Take it easy there, rough guy.
So I was blown away by it. I have the comic still. I will say that I was a little younger. I stapled the note to the back of the comic so I'd never lose it. And the comic is back in my comics closet now. So, but one day, many years later, I was working for Marvel. I took the comic into the office because Flo Steinberg had come back to work for Marvel. She had been there in the early days and gone away, and she was back working there. And I got to know Flo. She was just a delight. And I said, "I have to show you this." And she looked at it, she goes, "Oh, yes, that's my writing." And so Flo was the one who sent me the comic and cemented my love of Marvel Comics in my youth.
Yeah,
That's great.
that was Flo.
That's great.
So Walt, it's so funny. We got to know each other a little bit later on because I always heard the legend of Walt, and I was a huge fan of your work, but it was always the thing that always came after the genius. When people talk about the genius of your work, it was also he and Weezy are two of the absolute nicest people in comics, right? That you know this, you get this all the time, right?
Yes.
But I meant when I read comics as a little kid, then I dropped them, and then I started to read them again when I was about 25. And I remember going to a comic shop because I just been introduced to comics by reading Dark Knight and Watchmen, and I'm like, well, let me see what else is out there. So I picked up 5 Marvels and 5 DCs, and it became very, very evident to me that Marvel was all about the art and DC was really more about the writing aspect of things. Mm-hmm. But the Marvel books really, really stood out. But the one Marvel book that I picked out that was actually beautiful and readable was your X Factor. And that it blew me away. And so it was the only Marvel book. So when I started collecting again, it was almost all DC and X Factor. So that, and then I end up at DC doing, starting out there, and then suddenly get handed this book called Azrael with Archie Goodwin as the editor and Danny O'Neill as the writer. So I had these 2 legends sort of like, mentoring me on story, but it was always like, check out what Walt's doing. Check out what Walt's doing. And I think we could say this with great confidence that Archie was not just a brilliant writer, but probably the greatest editor that ever existed in this
I
business.
think that's right, and he was a phenomenal cartoonist as well. He just could do all of it.
And I, again, I learned so much about just the way, I'm a pretty young artist, and the way that he handled my starting to fall behind on the schedule and trying to get me just, he had sort of this, it was like a velvet hammer, you know what I mean? He sort of got the work out of you.
Yes.
So that, getting to know Archie, and I sort of got to know you through Archie, and then when my opportunity came to get an X book, I picked X Factor because of your run on it, and because Peter David was writing. It was kind of, to me, the only kind of readable book at the time of the X books. But so I need to thank you for that, because you were a huge inspiration before I even got to know you.
Oh well.
But
Thank
all
you.
right. So but I have to ask you something. I'm gonna, Dan, I go full screen here because I think I need Walt to see this.
You need his full attention. Hold on.
Well, yeah. So Walt, full screen, yeah.
Okay.
So Walt, what I have to, because you have perplexed me my entire life, so I need answers to this.
Uh-oh.
How do you pronounce this?
Oh. Shrak-a-doom, I believe, but louder and in a deep bass.
Okay, all right, fine. How about that?
Here's how I do my sound effects, Joe.
Oh, here we go.
Here's how I do them. What I do is, all these are done by John Workman. And most of my work, when I can arrange it, is lettered by John. Most of the work in my career since Alien has been lettered by John. He was the art director at Heavy Metal, got me the job on Alien. We began working together then and stayed together. And so what I will do when I'm working on a book, when I write a book, I'll do the layouts. I will send the layouts off to John. I will and I still do this analog style when I can. Not everybody lets me do it, but if I can still do it, I prefer it. I'll write the script for my thumbnails, which are on typewriter paper, copier paper, and I will blow them up on a Xerox machine to full size. I'll trace them off very loosely. I'll rule the lines out, the panel borders and the other borders, the outer limits, outer line borders. I'll rule all that stuff. And then I will lay tracing paper, just a very cheapo tracing paper on top, tape it down. And I spot on my copy with a pencil, all the way through each page. Then I number all my balloons. I number them on my script. I number them on the page. And on sound effects, when I'm typing a sound effect, once in a while I've got something I like, occasionally I'll use a real word. A guy drops his coffee cup, and I might use a sound effect, drop, D-R-O-P-P.
Right.
I don't always do that. I do it when it's kind of funny and it seems appropriate. But I'll write out a bunch of letters like that. They're in the original script. If we went back and looked, you'd probably find more letters than that, more vowels, more T's, maybe a couple of extra K's in the beginning. And on the tracing paper, I will I'll just freehand. I freehand out a rectilinear box with the sound effects going to fit in, whatever that is. And sometimes it's on an angle, sometimes it's straight across like this one. And I send everything off to John. And John basically squeezes in as many letters as he can get in there. Right. So I never quite know what my final sound effect's going to be like.
Well,
just like that until I get the lettering back from John.
Just say this one for me, Walt. Just say it.
Oh, Galactica.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Walt. I feel so much better now.
No problem. Happy to help.
That's very funny.
Speaking of old stories, when I first met you all at I think it was Dragon Con, I was like so excited to see you, and I had this little book that had all these amazing sketches in it that I got other artists to do it, and I was like, "Hey, Art, love your stuff. Can I get you to draw in my book?" And you said, "Sure." And you drew.
I must have been busy. That's a zip sketch. I developed that when I would be places where there was too many people and you just couldn't get a drawing for everybody, and I hate to disappoint anybody like that. So I developed a zip sketch where I signed my name and then put the character's head. Thor works almost the best. The character's head inside the sketch.
Dave always took it personally.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'll do you a better sketch next time I see you.
All right, I'll hold you to that.
I have one of those too, Walt, but it's just your signature, just the Brontosaurus dinosaur.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, well, that would have been okay. Well, you just signed it, but you know, I keep drawing. he drew a penis with balls on it, and I was like, what? Is he trying to tell me something? I don't know.
What was that?
Did I come across wrong or something?
It happens, Dave.
Well, one of the viewers wanted to know how you came up with the name for Beta Ray Bill.
I was going to ask that too. So
somebody else did. Our readers did.
Okay. Well, 2000. I'll tell you in a second. I will also say, if you're on Facebook, I have something there called the official Walter Simonson page, which is as close to a website as I probably am ever going to have. And on Facebook, on pages like that, you can put notes in, which are essays or whatever you want to do, long articles. And there's an article in there. You go find the notes on the official Walter Simonson page. That will give you almost a blow-by-blow description of how Bill came to be. But what the bit with the name, I read a lot of science fiction when I was in, I don't know, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grades, into my early years in New York, up until I was probably 26, 27, 28, a little later, not much now. So I was used to the customs of science fiction writing. And one of those customs in old pulp type stuff is if you fly to an alien planet and you discover an alien culture, and they come out and they're all speaking whatever they're speaking, you have a little thing in your belt. It's your universal translator, and you click on that, and suddenly it's, "Hey, how you doing, pal? Would you like coffee?" And and then you can speak back. So my feeling was, Bill doesn't have any lips. He has a very odd circular mouth that I will say now in public, I haven't done this much. Almost nobody gets right because they give him a real jaw. You look at the drawings of him, it's a circular thing behind his mouth. It's not I don't know what the hell it really is. There you're good because it's small and you'll never be able to tell. But it's not really a full jaw, and which is fine. You do the characters, you send them out, people do their own versions of it. But I figured I don't even know how Bill speaks. I'm not sure how he eats. I'm not sure how he drinks. It's a comic. I don't have to solve that stuff. I don't care. So I figure that whatever Bill's real name is, it's not in his own language. It's not Beta Ray Bill. It's really, and the universal translator is trying to make some sense out of it, and it comes out Beta Ray Bill. Now that's the science fiction-y, pulp side of it. The real answer is that in real life is that I wanted a name that sounded kind of science fiction-y. And in the Marvel Universe, gamma rays were already taken, and alpha rays, they're not very strong. I think they're helium nuclei, aren't they? Something like that. And it starts with an A, which is a soft sound. And I wanted a harder sound to start his name. That kind of left beta rays. Beta rays aren't really very strong. I think they're electrons. But it had a B, which I liked. I wanted that. And I wanted to give him, because in his origin, he's really anything but the common man in his race. But he is kind of the common man. He is their guardian. So I wanted a name that reflected an everyman kind of sensibility. Now, I didn't want to, that would be Smith or Jones or Johnson or whatever. I thought about Jones, actually, Beta Ray Jones. But at that time, Marvel already had Rick Jones. I think they were publishing Indiana Jones briefly, right about that same time. They had Louise Jones, who was editing for them. And I thought Jones was maybe a little too much. So I thought about it, and I decided, I'm an old Stan Lee guy. I like the alliteration. So Bill seemed like a good match for Beta. So that's where Beta Ray Bill came. And Bill, William, is a pretty standard name. It's like an everyman kind of name. And that's exactly where that name came from in real life. So I had two explanations. I had the one in the comic. I never explained it in the comic, but that's how I rationalized it to myself in the comic. And that's how I really arrived at that name in real life.
Sweet. What I love about that explanation, Walt, is that as you were talking all the different variations of the name, and you go into the whole chemistry of it. Well, the helium nuclei, and we're all going, oh yeah. We have not a clue what you're talking about.
No idea what I'm talking about. That's okay. Well, all I want to tell you is that.
Oh yeah, sure. We know. Yeah, we get it.
Yeah. Alpha rays, of course.
There was some thought in almost every aspect of Bill's creation, starting with the idea. The very beginning was the idea that. When you take over, I don't know if you do it yourself, and you take over a new book, you'd like to not do the same 8 stories everybody else has done ad infinitum. Yeah. And I was pretty familiar with Thor. I'd read pretty much all 20 years of it at the time. Now there's even more. I have no idea what's going on. But at the time, I knew the history pretty well. And the one thing is that nobody had ever picked up Thor's hammer. Actually, in real life, in the comic, Loki had picked up Thor's hammer back in the Stan and Jack issue. He got some extra juice from the Norn Queen, and so he could pick it up. But I chose to ignore that story. I thought, no, I don't care how much juice you got from the Norn Queen. It's just not happening. So I treated it as if it had never been picked up before, and I wanted to create a character who would be the first guy to pick it up, which meant he had to be worthy. But when you write a story, you would like to mislead your readers. You don't want them to guess where you're going, 20 pages ahead of when you're getting there. So I made Bill look like a monster because mostly in comics, short form, back then, no reprints. And that meant that, ugly guys are mostly evil. So, bad girls don't wear a lot of clothing. I mean, there's sort of these tropes that you come along in that stuff. And so I made him look like a monster. And I will say, I've heard people say to me afterward, many years later, oh, I knew he was a good guy. I knew the hammer. I knew. At the time, nobody ever said that to me. I got
no way.
Oh my God, how can I have this evil guy pick up? Don't you know what that story is? Don't you understand what's... And I got which was great. A lot of upset people who were... And then they had to come back to the next issue to see how I screwed it up.
I was very upset by the whole thing. I remember as a kid, I had a subscription, the Marvel subscription. I was like, now I'm buying Thor, and this is
this is the guy. Yeah,
this cover, like, I was like, and he destroyed the logo. I mean,
I know. I have no shame.
Yeah.
Dan,
Dan, what did you think of? What did you think of Thor becoming a frog at that point?
Yeah, there you go,
I was not happy about that either.
Oh, there you go. That's one of my. That was the only story. Most of the letters back in snail mail days, I wrote my letter columns. Any book that I wrote like that of the FF, I wrote the letter columns. I read every letter and answered them. I answered them in Marvel's editorial voice. But that frog story, that is the, mostly what you got. It's not like it's the inverse of the web. You get 95% letters that love it, and maybe 5% that don't like it. And I would run a don't like letter in most letter columns because frequently they're more interesting than the good letters. It's like, wow, this is greater than sliced bread. And I'm glad the guy thinks so, but it's not much of a letter to put in a letter column. Whereas the letters that were unhappy would often be more interesting. So that frog story, I didn't get a lot of negative letters, but I got about half and half positive letters and letters that were confused that would say, is this supposed to be funny? Is this like a joke?
Or are you high? Did you get that one a lot? Are you high, Walt?
Was I high? I get asked that once in the blue moon. Yeah. Although my favorite was some kids. I don't remember this quote right. We did a high school show here probably 25 years ago. And, 25 years ago, I would have been 50 or thereabouts, a little younger. And one of the kids there was talking to Wheezy. We gave a presentation. John and Judy Bogdanov were there, and we had a great time. And one of the kids afterwards was talking, I think was talking to John Bogdanov, and said, Mr. Simonson is so old, and he's been doing this for so long, and he's still totally twisted. And I thought that was awesome.
That's great. That's awesome.
It was. But I did have some people drop out. I had people that were reading the book. I got one from a lady in Buffalo. I ran part of her letter. Couldn't run the whole thing. And she was very upset that I was with what I was doing in the book. And it turned out she was really upset because I got rid of Don Blake. And I'd never used Jane Foster, at least not then. And clearly she was able to project dating Thor through Jane Foster.
She missed the soap opera comics.
And she missed, her tagline that my Wheezy and I still use to this day is that by getting rid of this stuff, that we, meaning her and everybody else, we are Earth people.
Earth people?
Meaning that you just couldn't relate to like not having Don Blake and Jane Foster.
Oh.
So, but that was a great line. So now it's time to put my comics away, and I'll put my Thors away. I wrote her a straight answer, and I said, well, Walt, and again, the Marvel editorial voice, Walter's not going to be doing the comic forever. So there will come a time when somebody else will bid the comic, and you'll be able to come back to reading it. I'm sorry you don't like it, but
another 10 years after that or something.
Well, no, I was only on the book about 3.5 to close to 4. So she could have come back shortly. Especially because Tom went back to doing kind of very much the Jack Kirby, Stan Lee kind of Thor. So I'm sure she was thrilled.
Yeah, I think I was doing backups at that point. A job you got me, actually. So thank you.
No. That must have been a mistake. I don't know how that happened. But
it had to have been. Exactly.
I think this is another reader question here, a viewer question.
Sure.
From Patrick Wedge. Wants to know, of all the characters you've designed and worked on, which one did you regret making so detailed because you had to draw it?
That's a great question.
I still haven't learned my lesson, which is really sad. Can I put up a drawing and you can put it full screen? Is that possible?
Yeah.
I explained to everybody else here. I'm not going to explain it to you, the viewer, right now. But I will put it up and you can figure it out for yourself. But this is one of my more recent.
Holy moly!
Wow.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to draw that every day.
Characters.
It's a tough one.
And I had to draw her in a handful of.
Hey, Dan, are you paying attention to that? That's what it looks like when you care about your work.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Hercules Unbound was a pretty complicated costume, and enough so that I haven't done them in a million years. But once the blue moon, someone will ask me for a Hercules Unbound sketch. I'm only do heads now, so I'm kind of off the hook. But I used to have to ask people for reference, and I would stipulate, if it's a character I don't know or don't know well, you better bring the reference so I can get it right. And that was probably the first one I did that was really complicated. And Manhunters was a little Rococo, but not nuts. More like Baroque, but it wasn't Rococo. The Hercules Unbound was Rococo. So what I've done, I seem to do costumes that have a lot of texture and a lot of shapes. I'm really a shape artist in many ways. I love shapes. I love playing with them. It has to do with my compositions, with the way the characters look. And so I'm best colored by colorists who understand shape. In the old days when computer color was brand new, I got a lot of color people would render over all the stuff I was doing, and it would really screw up the shapes, or it would kind of make new ones that I thought usually weren't as effective as the ones I'd had. Laura Martin was brilliant at coloring my stuff.
She's doing great work on Ragnarok.
She did. She's done great work on Ragnarok, and that's part of it. She understands the shapes I do and really plays with them in a way that makes them better than they are. But mostly when Laura colors my stuff, it looks better when she's done than it does when it's in black and white. So I'm thrilled by it.
Did Klaus ever color you?
Yes, actually he did once. Do you guys remember Baxter books? The audience probably doesn't mostly. In the early 80s, comics went into some different formats to try out different things. And they began printing some comics on what was called Baxter paper.
Oh yeah, Baxter paper. Yeah.
I don't know what that was, except that, but it was a paper that was a little heavier duty than regular newsprint, and the result was it did not absorb as much ink. So if you colored a comic book with the normal colors that you would have colored a newsprint comic, it became extremely garish and very bright on Baxter paper. And so colorists had to kind of relearn some coloring skills to do a little more down-tone color. It's still the same kind of coloring palette, which is very limited, but they had to kind of make it a little more down-tone to make it come out right. And they produced those for a number of years. So in 98 or whenever it was, I did let's see, was it 98? No, 83. It was 83. DC reprinted the Manhunter stuff. Archie wrote a new introduction, and they reprinted the original 7 episodes. And Archie, I don't know if he actually edited, he might have. He got Klaus to recolor the Manhunter work because that edition, that reprint of Manhunter, was printed on Baxter paper. And it would have been very garish if they just used the original coloring. So Klaus did the coloring on that and did a lovely job, I thought.
Yeah.
As far as I know, that's the only stuff of mine Klaus has colored.
He's been secretly coloring things for years, just in his private, probably collection.
Oh, cool.
No, I don't know.
I hope so. He was good. He did a nice job with it.
Yeah, he's a great colorist, and people don't realize how good he is in that department.
In fact, after Archie died, he and I have been working on a last Manhunter story. DC had been actors for years to do one. And we did we plotted one out in our old way. I went to his office, we shot the breeze, plotted one out. And then it sat around for several months while I was thinking about it and not really doing it. We were doing it the way we used to do it. In Manhunter originally, the first 2 or 3 issues were done full script. And the last 3 or 4, by the time we were kind of working like that, they were done Marvel style. So this one was plotted Marvel style. We sat in his office, talked about it, worked it. He had an idea that worked out really well. And I took it home, and then he died. And it was not unexpected. He'd been ill for years with cancer, but it was quite a shock. And I thought, oh, man, I'm never getting this story done, because I did not want to write it. I did not want to script it. That character to me was always me and Archie, and I wasn't going to do it. Well, I don't live with the second best editor in comics for nothing. So one day, Louise and I were talking, and I was lamenting not doing it. And she said, well, so if you don't write it, maybe you could do it as a silent story. And I thought, well, yeah, maybe. And I talked to DC, and they said, yeah, if you can do it as a silent story, we'll print it. We'll put it in the book. And Denny was assigned the story. He was as the editor. And it took me about 4 tries of the first 3 or 4 pages to try and get the pacing down. I couldn't figure out how I wanted to do it with no words. But about 4 tries in, I began to get the thumbnails. And finally, by the time I was done, it was originally going to be an 8-page story. By the time it was done, it was 23 pages long, I think. I cheated in a couple of spots. Some guy will be reading a newspaper, and it will have a headline across it. Or it says Gotham City Limits on the sign over there that made some sense in the context of the story. But Denny went back, and I am pretty sure, I have to double check, I'm pretty sure he got Klaus to come back and color that 23-page story, because they used the coloring from the Baxter book. So they got the same colors to come back and do the last story, which was nice.
That's great.
Very cool.
Too many boring stories. Sorry, guys.
No, not at all.
Well, I've seen you post so many neat things on your Twitter over the years, where you'll post like an architectural drawing, or your dinosaur work from even when you were a kid.
Sure.
Like that. What do you, when you're drawing for recreation, if you do it all just to get out of your head, what do you draw? You have such a wide gambit of things that I've seen you work on.
I almost never draw if it's not an assignment.
Really?
I do. I really don't. Now I do things like for example, right now, I was not always a deadline assignment. Right now, I finished up the last story of the 3rd arc of Ragnarok, literally about 2 days before the country was shut down. So the 5th issue of this arc, it's a 6-issue arc, 4 issues came out, the 5th issue is printed. I have my comps, but it got swallowed by the shutdown. Mm-hmm. So probably in some basement somewhere, there's some boxes of Ragnarok, the breaking of Helheim #5. #6 was being colored. It actually is being colored at the moment. But I haven't any idea how that's going to work out as far as coming out. So, but I am done that. So I'm thinking about the 4th arc. Hopefully there'll be one. I know what I'm going to do. It's actually, I know how I'm going to work it out, or at least the story in general. But I have I end up agreeing to do a variety of drawings for people. Sometimes it's friends. Sometimes it's for charity. Sometimes it's one of my friends has been ill, needs some bucks to help out, things like that. But I find, because there's no deadline on those things usually, I tend to eat them. They sit around waiting for me to get to them. And I don't, because there's always some deadline stuff to do. Well, right now there's not. So I said, okay, I reached critical mass. I got about 13 or 14 drawings, not that many this time. And I say, oh, damn it. Now I've got it. Let me do those stupid drawings. And I'll start drawing them. And so that's what I've been doing recently. I've been working at about a quarter speed. I think with no deadlines and the house, everybody shut down. I'm like, I like to take naps now. I'm an old guy. So I take naps. But I got some work done. If you want to see a couple, I'll show you some of the ones I've done already.
Yeah, hell yeah.
They're not full. Most of them aren't full size. This is
Oh wait, hold on. Let me get this off.
Get that down.
All right.
There we go.
Where am I going here? This is the
right on.
Banshee, who's a DC character. John Byrne created her when he was doing, I guess, Superman, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I ended up, you can see her clearly enough, I ended up writing her in a Superman Batman story that I did with Dan Brereton a while back. And then this one is for a friend of mine who just needed some help. Right now I'm penciling most of them, and I'm going to ink all of them at once. So I did your standard Marvel Thor.
Sweet.
Sitting on the Rainbow Bridge with Asgard.
I saw that the other day on maybe it was Facebook or something.
I'm sure I did. I mean, I usually, but I put up the Silver Banshee as well. This one, I'm not sure went up. Sadly, I've already forgotten what this was for. Hopefully, I'll remember at some point. But another.
You did that. You did that for me, Walt.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, thank you. Good. I'm glad to find out what this was for. So let me get over here. I guess you can see it.
Yeah, Joe needs help paying for his 5th house.
Okay. And let me sneak up and do one more drawing.
Paid for. It's already paid in cash.
From one commission.
This was a drawing for a friend of mine who has had a bunch of medical issues. Right now, things are cool, so this has not gone out, but it would go out to be auctioned. So it's a picture of Hela.
Wow.
Nice.
That's stunning. Wow.
That's bananas.
So,
Dan, again, you're paying attention, Dan?
I am.
This is what it looks like when someone cares. When they put the work in, Dan, this is what it looks like.
Oh, that's beautiful.
But that one came out nicely. This is also this one. You probably, I don't know if you can see it in the resolution here. It's actually inked over blue line. I did a pencil drawing, and then I was a little worried that I would screw it up when I inked it. And it's a pretty elaborate drawing. I didn't want to screw it up. So what I did was I made a blue line. I scanned it, converted the blue line to cyan, light cyan, printed it off on drawing paper, and then inked that. And I usually on those things, I actually go back and pencil some to tighten a few things up here and there, make some changes. So it's not, I don't ink exactly what you see, but that's how that was done. As it turned out, I didn't screw it up. So I was happy about that. But that's what that drawing was for.
Is that charcoal on the top there?
What's that?
Is that charcoal on the top?
No, I'm just, this is just on the top of this here.
Yeah, the clouds are.
That's
yeah.
probably-
Oh, it's cross etching. Wow. Okay, now I can see it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's real work, Dan.
Yeah.
I mostly don't. I don't go to a lot of other mediums. Mm-hmm. I'm mostly a pen and ink guy. I use brush occasionally, but I used a Hunt Pro Quill 102 for my entire career. I discovered it when I was in art school, and I've used it ever since. I went to brushes, or did brushes, probably 20 years ago. I began using brush. I hadn't used them much before that. I could not make a Winsor Newton brush work for me. I don't know why. I'd like to think it's because it got crappier, but I don't know if that was true. But they just did not work. And then Tom Palmer, who's a good buddy, turned me on to Raphael brushes. And I found the Raphael 8404 number 2 or number 3 worked really well for me. Still does. So I've used those ever since. But again, I don't do most of my work with brush. I do, I fill in the blacks and stuff, but I do it occasionally.
Did Dan Green ever ink you?
He inked one issue of X Factor. For
some
reason, one of these editorial decisions, which I do not pretend to understand because I'm not medical and never have been, it was decided to swap inkers on the X-Men and X Factor. I don't know why. So I think that's what I'm remembering anyway. I'm remembering Wyacek must have inked the X-Men, Dan inked X Factor. Did a really beautiful, delicate job. It was really gorgeous. I was thrilled. I think, of course, X-Men outsold X Factor. So that month, Dan's royalty check would have been smaller. I can't imagine he was pleased about that. But he did just a beautiful job, and I was thrilled to see it. So I was glad he did. I don't think he's inked anything else I've done. Just that one job.
Hey, Walt, just a question for you. So when you say you don't draw, let's say as a hobby, right? You draw an assignment considered. Do you find that it takes you, let's say there's some gap time between, times that you sit at the table. Do you find that it takes you a little bit of time to get back into the groove of it, to get to get in sort of the flow, or do you just somebody could just jump right back in?
Mostly. Well, I mean, I'm doing these other drawings right now, so the time I get the next Ragnarok's up and running, I won't have a lot of downtime. I mostly just go back to drawing. I mean, the kind of drawing I do, I've worked out. John Bogdanov refers to it as my paper-intensive lifestyle. Let me see if I can find one here. I'll show this to you. Right now, I'm drawing a gorilla. I have a friend I owe a drawing to. He wanted a picture of a gorilla. I'm good with that. So I got some reference. I found reference in the web. Drew a gorilla. I decided the gorilla's head was a little too small on my original drawing, so I Xeroxed the head, blew it up about 10 or 15%, and added it, and then I re-Xeroxed it. I keep having trouble with this camera. I re-Xeroxed it so it's all in one, and then I can light box it. So this is the rough drawing. I'll trace this off, and then I will ink that, and then I'll have the pencil drawing with the small head, and I'll send it off that way. So I find that if I'm having trouble, like I do a lot of rough drawing anyway. So while I may not be drawing, for pleasure in quite that sense. I love drawing. So the drawing I do is for pleasure. I will show you. I'll get one more thing here. I'm just going to ink
that thing. I'd love to ink that gorilla.
I won't show you all of them because there's just a lot of them. But the idea is that, if I can get this turned around a little bit and get this in here. The idea is that these are the rough drawings I've done for a variety for my comics, for Ragnarok, there's a ton of them. This is for different, that was, get pulled over here. So, I can't tell what the hell that is. I know what that's, the serpent falling into the pit. Oh, and I'll show you one, but I can't tell what this is for, but I'll show you this one.
Let's see. Starfish, man.
A creature.
Very cool.
And so I used to just, here's that was Thor lying on the ground after he's all tuckered out and grabbing a nap. There he is. So I do a lot of loose drawing all the time anyway. I had hundreds of these sheets. A year ago or so, a little more than a year ago, Gene Scrocco,
Gene.
Wife. Gene persuaded. Well, she wanted to sell my artwork. And,
I know this story. She told me.
Oh, okay. And
go ahead.
We were at a convention, and we were having dinner together. A bunch of us around a big table. She was sitting next to me, and she said, "Let me sell your artwork," or words to that effect. And I said, "Oh, well, I don't sell my artwork." And for perhaps the first and only time in my life, I saw Gene Scrocco speechless. Didn't last long, but she said, "You what?" And I said, "I don't sell it." She said, "What do you do with it?" Well, I just, whatever. So, but we talked about it, and I've talked about my process, about how I did it. And I have all these little drawings. I used to just throw them out. And a few years ago, one of my friends, Steve, said, "Don't throw these out." I went, well, okay, but now I've got 1 million of them lying around the damn house. And so I sent them off to Jean. Every time we get together, well, now we're not, obviously, but when we get together at a convention or something, I'll bring a whole mitt full of them, give them to her, and she'll price them all, and she'll sell them. Well, she was selling at conventions. Now they're through her website, the Spiderweb Art Gallery. So I actually am selling little art. I haven't moved. I think she's hoping that I will move up to letting her sell my originals. But
she is.
That's going to be a long wait.
She's waiting. Patient.
I am as patient as she is.
Do you at least check them? Check your original art from time to time to make sure the silverfish haven't eaten them all yet?
I've looked around. If it doesn't last longer than me, it's not going to matter.
That's fantastic.
The very first art I ever bought was a Close Encounters page that Klaus inked.
Yeah, stuff I've done that other people have inked.
Yeah, then they
get the inking share, and then some of that gets sold. So
yeah,
there are a few Thor pages out there. I think Terry and Bob inked a couple of my Thors, so some of those pages are out there in real life.
What's the rationale for not wanting to sell them?
What's that?
What's the rationale for not wanting?
Well, there was the original rationale The rationale now is that I'm like Smog the Dragon. And I have all my pages in a giant pile in a room, and I throw my lie on them. And I'm like Scrooge McDuck. I dive into them and I swim through them. I come up and I dive out. I come up out of them. I throw them up in the air. I let them fall down and hit me on the head. So as Scrooge always said, but with his money. But the original reason is that, I mean, when I first got into comics, they were not giving artwork back. Artwork that was before art returns had begun. They were begun, I can't remember, 75, 76, somewhere in there. DC went back and they tried to, as much stuff as they could find. They used to destroy it. The story is, I don't know if it's true, the story is that Neil Adams walked into the DC production office one day and there was some gopher who had a paper cutter, and he was just chopping up pages in half because they were easier to throw out that way, or smaller bits. And he threw a fit and they quit doing that. But the problem is when you're doing however many books back then, even 20 books a month or 30, whatever it was, artwork fills up pretty rapidly. I mean, the space does. So by the time I was working there were just drawers full of the stuff, and there were cabinets and all sorts. Their stuff was just everywhere. And when they began giving artwork back, it was about 4 years after I'd started, and they found almost all of the art I had done. An issue of Manhunter was missing. Never saw that again. And I had done a battle album, which is one of those things they used to do in the war books where they showed a piece of equipment and gave a little, a Phantom F4, whatever, they had a little blurb about it. And I did the Tirpitz, the German battleship Tirpitz, which was a sister ship of the Bismarck, because I'm an old battleship fan. I just like the stories of those giant juggernauts. And so I drew the Tirpitz. Everyone knows the Bismarck. And it was a double page spread, and it was on, I can't get far enough away from the camera to show it, but it was on a double page spread's worth of paper, single sheet of paper. And when I got it back, it had been cut in half.
Oh.
I think, it was on different flats because it wasn't the center spread for the comic. So right. I understood why it was all done. But I did get most of my work back, including my first job, the Cyrano's Army, the job I did with Len. So that was pretty cool. But early on, I used to get photostats of the work. I couldn't afford full-size stats, but I could afford about 2/3 size stats. And I would get those made so I could look at the work and study it and try and figure out what I had done wrong. Because, of course, in the comic, it's all shrunk down. It's on crappy paper and crappy printing, which is great for your mistakes. They makes them invisible. But it was hard to tell what they were. And so I wanted to look at the work more carefully and see what I thought I could improve. One of the stories I've told a million times, but it's still true. One of the early lessons I learned. I did it. One of my early jobs, about 5 months into the business, was an Alamo story. A friend of mine named Don Krar wrote it, and it was a true story of the Alamo about how they were when they were surrounded. Did you guys ever see the Disney version with Fess Parker and Buddy Ebsen? Mm-hmm. Well, in that, if you remember in the Alamo, in their version of the Alamo, Buddy Ebsen gets pissed off at Davy for some reason, and he sneaks out of the Alamo and rides through the Mexican lines, and he goes off looking for reinforcements. And in the end, there aren't any to be had. So he comes back, rides back through the Mexican lines, and gets into the Alamo. Instead of saying, well, look at the time. I could be in Florida in 12 days. So that turns out to be based on a real event. There was a gentleman named James Butler Bonham who did exactly that. He was in the Alamo garrison. He rode out, couldn't find reinforcements, and he came back. And he died on the last day like everybody else. So that was the story. It was exactly 3 pages long. It was tiny. But I was young in those days, and I read an entire paperback about the Alamo so I could try and get it right, as much of the stuff as I could get right. And the last panel is a third of a page, maybe, little thereabouts. And it's an oblique down shot on the entire Alamo stockade, showing little dots for all the guys where the Mexicans are coming in 4 different columns, and the Texicans are all inside the Alamo. And there's a wood stockade in one spot because the adobe stockade around it had not been completed. And there's one of the stories I read in the book, no idea if it was true, was that as the Mexican column was coming in, they were attacking that stockade because it was the lowest wall, presumably the weakest part of the stockade. And what happened was there's some evidence to suggest that as they came in, they were turned and went on over somewhere to attack a different part of the wall. And the theory at the time was that Davy Crockett was there with about 12 other Tennesseans apparently, and they were all had flintlocks. They were whether they were shooting, and they were expert shots, presumably. And so the thought is that the fire from that stockade was so accurate that the column broke and went over somewhere where the fire wasn't quite so accurate and went in that way. So I tried to get all that stuff down in the on paper as much as I could, and
I got to see this thing.
Ultimately, that story, I didn't know this until years later. I had done nothing but science fiction up to that point, but I had learned that to do science fiction in comics was like a death sentence. That this is well before Star Wars, 5 years before Star Wars. Science fiction was a very small, little, teeny ghetto in comics. And so I tried to get other jobs, and I got the Alamo job. I did not a very good job with it, but it's the job that persuaded Archie that I could draw other stuff and persuade him to offer me Manhunter. So, but what I was going to tell you about that job, I've got a profile shot of Travis. I just drew a picture of a guy sideways, and I could not get the eye. I couldn't locate it in this simple profile shot. And I drew it and I redrew, I erased it and I redrew it and I erased it and I redrew it. Must have maybe a dozen times. And finally I drew a profile eye on a separate little strip of paper, and I moved it around on the head until I got to a place, and I pasted it down, rubber cemented it down on top of the head. It was still wrong. It was the best I could do. And the lesson I learned about 2 or 3 years later, I figured it out. I hadn't figured it out when I was doing it. But I figured it out because I went back, and maybe it's later than that. I went back and looked and went, oh my God. And clearly what was going on was I had drawn, the head itself was badly drawn. I had not gotten the structure of the head right. And the result was, there was in fact no place for that eye to go that would have made any sense. I'd have been way off better if I had simply taken my eraser, erased the head, and just redrawn it. I could probably redrawn it in 5 minutes and gotten it right. But that was one of the lessons I learned from. So I would study the stuff to try and figure out what I could learn from it, what mistakes I'd made, how not to make those mistakes again. And ultimately, in the 77, I did a job. I had a handsome offer for the splash page. I sold the splash page. But then I spent the money and I didn't have the page. And I thought, well, what was the point of that? So I didn't do it again. Oh, look at that. Wow. Cool.
Wow, Dave. A bit of a show off.
Maybe I'll go back and right? I put that little gap behind his teeth like a horse skull. Isn't that what you did?
There you go.
All right.
Nice. That's very nice. Maybe we'll talk tomorrow. I can go back writing it. You can start drawing it.
Yeah.
It would look better.
Jeez.
Hey, Walt, I got 2 quick questions for you.
All right.
One, did you ever try drawing digitally?
Not in any real sense. Right. I have done, I have Photoshop. It's like using a nuclear bomb to crack nuts. I correct John Workman's typos, of which there aren't very many. It saves me having to imitate his lettering and redo stuff. Because one of the things I want is when I turn the work in, I want it to be as perfect as possible, because stuff isn't always corrected in the office. I'm sure that's never true. Nobody will understand. But I want to, keep it straight. But I did do a drawing. I don't even know why I was asked to do this. I did do it years ago, maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago. John Severn did a Batlash series, 6-issue series for DC, right? And I was asked to do covers for it, and I was thrilled to do them. I'm not sure John needed me drawing his covers, but I was happy to do them. And the last cover is a gun in a holster with a belt around it, and it's looped around a rough wooden cross, hanging from the cross, the way you put GI dog tags on crosses. Okay. And once I was finished it and had it scanned and cleaned up, I looked at it. I went back and looked at more reference, and I had not drawn the bottom of it was a 44 or 45, I don't remember. But I had not drawn the barrel, the very tip of it coming out of the holster at the bottom, which gave it a pretty short barrel. And so I actually went back with Photoshop, essentially using an eraser, either in black or in white, and drawing the lines in until I got what I wanted out of it. So I look, that is my entire claim to digital drawing. I did one other quick drawing on a Cintiq, but the Cintiq, it was a used Cintiq. It died. Next time I went back to it, it was dead. and I never got it fixed. I thought, well, I think this may be the omen that I shouldn't be doing this.
Right. Well, I ask only because when you were talking about because I do I think we all do that sort of sketching over and then fixing the head in patches. And you talk about, I was able to get rid of my Xerox machine because in Photoshop I was able to just scan the drawing and then do all the, shrink the head, and space it up that way. So I was wondering if that's something you had thought of, or you just like the tactile pasting it.
I like the tactile sense. I just I essentially I've learned to use a Xerox machine as if it were a computer in a sense for the drawing. And also, what I learned it because years ago, I don't know if you guys ever saw these autographs.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah.
They were, back in the 70s when they came in, they were just revelation. Essentially, opaque projectors, and you could put a small drawing up on the board, and you could project on your drawing board, and you can make it bigger or smaller, sharpen it up. It was great. And I don't know, Chaikin had a big wall mounted one he had for a while in his apartment in Queens. And but they eventually, Autograph put out essentially not quite a portable machine, but a desk mounted machine. Didn't have to have it on a light box. I mean, on a wall. And so a bunch of us bought a bunch of autographs together. We ganged it up and bought a bunch of them. And then I had a friend in New Jersey, Tony. I've forgotten Tony's last name. It'll come to me eventually, but I haven't seen him in years now. I don't know if he was kind of an art dealer at the time. Anyway, we had them shipped to his mom's house because it saved us a large amount of money on New York State tax. At the time, Jersey tax was significantly less than New York. And so we did that. And then somebody took a car, went over there, picked them up, brought them back. So I did a lot of autographing for a while. I was still doing it in 81 when I did Star Wars for Marvel. I was still doing autograph stuff then. I don't know, probably even early into Thor. Oh, I would have done that through Thor, actually. I got my first Xerox machine just when I started doing the Fantastic Four. And that would have been about 89 or thereabouts. And the first thing I did, you had to look at my first FF. There were 2 or 3 Xerox effects in there where I have them going into a weird dimension. So I found a pattern of ink splatter. It may have come out. I had some of the Dover books, the copyright-free Dover books of patterns and op art, stuff like that. And I would collect some of that, or I'd take some of that. I'd Xerox out the patterns. I'd blow them up, or I'd shrink them down. I'd paste them in with rubber cement. So, of course, they're all yellow and dying now. But I did a lot of that kind of stuff with the Xerox machine. Yeah. And then, xerography, I understand. Stuff like computers, not so much.
Not so much.
I'm happy to stick with it.
So here's my other question for you, because you've probably been hearing him kind of hinting about it. Like Dan is asking you, hey, did so-and-so ink you? Did so-and-so? Has Dan Penosian ever inked you, Walter?
No. Not to my knowledge.
No. I would have been the first thing I would have put up.
Right. We can work something out
for everybody too.
We'll try and work something out.
But I'm just trying to give you a little bit of the subtext of the conversation that's been happening here, Walter. Is that Dan is sort of winking, hey, have I ever inked you? I don't think so, have I?
Well, we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, you never know. That gorilla piece, that thing looked amazing.
No, that one's going to be nervous to pencil because John McDaniel gave it some nice praise on Twitter. And now I'm very nervous about doing the final pencil because I'm going to screw up the stuff he likes. But what can you do? You just have to do the drawing anyway. Oh, also, what you were talking earlier about whether you, after a layoff, you kind of go back to it or it takes a while to get it back or however that works. One of the things I have found is that every so often I'll be working regularly and I will find that suddenly I can't draw. The drawings, they suck. I can't get stuff straightened out. I can't get it to look right. And I think, I've been doing this, let's say go back a ways, for 30 years. Why can I not get this right? And Wheezy figured out, I'll just have to work. I mean, the deadlines, you get stuff done. And maybe after a few days, suddenly that levels out. I'm back to drawing. Oh yeah, I can remember how to draw. And Wheezy was the one, again, great to live with comics, second best editor. And Wheezy was the one who figured out that, we looked back at the stuff, that generally what happens is before I hit one of those periods, my work is at like this level. Then I hit one of those periods and do it. When I come back, it's up here. It's a little better. I mean, I don't make giant leaps like I did when I was much younger. When when you're really young, you make giant leaps when you keep working. I liken it to having an XY axis, and the drawings I'm doing are going up. They're getting better and better, but they're flattening out to the infinity as they approach the x-axis. They're getting better. Hopefully, they'll be better all the time. It may or may not be true, but I found that when I had one of those periods where I just couldn't draw, my guess is that what's happening is that my eye has improved, or my brain has improved. The synergy between the two has improved in a way that I see the work in a way that I didn't understand before. And it takes a while for my hand to catch up to that, to be able to start realizing the new vision I've got or the new way I'm seeing stuff. And that takes a little while. I mean, not longer than a week usually. It's an extremely frustrating week. Now, because this is how I think of it, when it does happen, which is rarely, even now, I don't fret about it. I do use language I'm not going to repeat here. But I just, oh man, can't believe it. And but I just plow through it. And eventually I plowed through it enough that I come out the other side. That part. Also, maybe if you guys does this happen to you guys? When I'm working on a book, when I did Alien for heavy metal, I was the most intense work I ever did. We had to get it done by a certain time to get the book out in time for the movie. It was just a grueling experience. We didn't sleep. I couldn't do it now. I couldn't work that hard anymore. But got it finished. And when it was done, I turned it. I was euphoric briefly. And then I was depressed. And I was depressed for, I'm remembering about 5 months where I didn't get anything done. I got a little done, but not much. And then finally I came out of it, went back to work. And I find if I've got a project like that where I put a lot into it and really busted my ass to try and get it to come out, that I will often be depressed when the job is over. And it takes me a while that was the longest stretch by far. Mostly it's a matter of a few weeks, if that, a couple of weeks maybe. But I find I get depressed after I finish something like that. And I have to gin up to get something started again. Does this happen to you guys at all?
It happened to me with that I wrote a book, Slots, and after I had so much fun doing that, by the time I was done, I was like, how am I going to replace that feeling? Because I had so much autonomy to do what I wanted, and I knew that was a rare opportunity. So
it's tough. It can be hard.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's such an emotional. I mean, it's your art can be, you're putting so much of yourself and your emotions into it that there is kind of an empty space when you finish a project, especially one that you really cared about. It's hard to replace that.
And in Jeff's case, he doesn't have any friends, so it's even more empty. And
it's terrible.
I mean, it's true. It's
put him on suicide watch.
Yeah, it's lonely at the top.
You know what he does, Walt? He spends a lot of time in the farmer's market. And we worry about him.
Naming cows.
Yeah, I still suffer from that stuff, Well, from time to time. But I remember as a young artist, it was really, really tough because I talked about this on another stream I did. It was tough because you don't quite understand what's happening, right? You're new to the game. You're like, did I get as good as I can get? Is this it? Did I forget how to draw? And then it took me a while. Not so much to figure out what to do, but to identify when, like I always say, it's one of those days where the eyes aren't lining up, right? You're literally engraving the board, trying to fix it. And when I got to be more of a seasoned pro, I started to identify those days and just say to myself, I'm generally drawing 7 days a week. Any day could be a weekend. Any day could be Saturday. So when I feel that, once I've been on a panel for more than a couple of hours, I realized, put the pencil down, stand up. It's Saturday. Call it a day. And then come back the next day, and it'll be a lot fresher. But it took me a long time to be able to forgive myself for being shitty on that day. It's a slump, right? You know what I mean? So I always that's why I always tell younger artists, forgive yourself. Just call, you can't take too many of those in a row, though. You can take one, right? You can't take too many. Yeah.
So.
Jeff,
the good part about that is that I recognize it now. So I may still not be able to draw, but I still may be depressed or whatever. but it doesn't drive me nuts. I just go, oh crap, and then I just go off and do something else for a little while.
Yeah, you know it's going to come back at some point. Yeah.
Yep. At least so far.
Sure will. Hey guys, it's that time for me. I have to get going.
Walk the dog.
Great seeing you, man. Awesome.
Good to see you guys.
So, I'll leave it to the mercy of these clowns. All right.
Are you guys the art?
Oh wait, the art. Yes. Yeah. Look, Ben, it's almost done.
Sure. There's
all right.
Okay, look at that. The rocks are done. Yeah.
Rocks are important.
No feet on this one, Ben. I'm sorry. But I kind of like, hang on, I'm trying to get the camera here. Where's the camera? Kind of like the hammer. Okay, you know.
Yep.
It's looking good.
Nice. Is almost done. So
awesome.
This might be in the mail for you tomorrow, or I might send it out tomorrow. We'll see.
Wow.
Maybe.
I'll send you my address.
Right, exactly.
Walt wants it, it's his.
Yeah, I won't fault you there. Take care, Joe.
Take care, guys.
Take care, Joe.
Bye, Joe.
Take care. Bye, Walt.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Well, several of the viewers have asked for an update on how Wheezy's foot is doing.
Oh, it's actually fine. She's completely healed. For those viewers who don't know what's going on, she broke her ankle beginning of last August. And it was really healed by somewhere in October was her last. She went to the doctor maybe early November. It was healed by then. She had to have a plate and a couple of screws and several pins put in. She went over. We were walking the dog. It was twilight. That was probably a mistake. And she stepped in a hole and went over and just broke both bones just above her foot. So, and she was completely aware of it. She said she heard it snap when she went.
Oh, but, damn! It's a horrible sound.
It wasn't good. And I was in front of her, but I was maybe 10 feet too far to be able to turn around and grab her. By the time I heard her cry out, I spun around just to see her at about a 45-degree angle, going back and hitting the pavement in the park. Didn't crack her head. Didn't do any other damage. I mean, we were really lucky. But they did put stuff in it. I mean, the doctor was great. The follow-ups were great, and she's now really fully recovered. Now, if she stands for a long time in one place, sometimes her ankle will ache a little bit, or if she walks for a long period of time. But she's really, it's fine. The X-rays, the break's completely healed. They keep the pins and the rest of it. It's all in there. She's now the bionic woman, or at least she has a bionic leg, and it's worked out really well. So thank you very much. But she's doing fine.
That's great. Good to hear.
I think so too.
Yeah. I wish which room Tony Donnelly has told me about. You have like an amazing.
Don't listen to that guy.
Yeah.
Character.
He's no good.
But he's always tells me about your wall of books and the great he's keep an eye on him when he's in the house, by the way.
Let me see. Give me a second. Let me flip on an overhead light.
Let's see.
I will say that I don't know that I would do this now. I mean, I love books. For me, I got so many. And what you're going to see is a fraction of what we have in the house. A fraction.
I saw one picture, Walt, on maybe it was Facebook or something, and someone else posted a picture. They had visited you, and the library was impressive. It was amazing.
Well, this is my studio. I'm going to turn the camera this way.
Oh, yeah,
nice.
Oh, and this is like just the studio, right? There's another whole room. Oh, I see the old artists.
Artist edition. That's right. The famous artist school.
I have those.
And then this is the other side of the studio.
Wow.
This is like,
and that's above my light box.
Wow.
Now they're all semi-organized. I mean, and it's one of these things where I probably wouldn't do this now, because nowadays you can find most of this reference online. You can find a virtually all of it online, and that's what this stuff really was for. It was for reference. So over on the shelves over there, I've got about 2.5 shelves, which is going to be about 12, 24, 25, 26 feet of European graphic novels, most of which I can't read, but artwork I like.
I have a lot of
I could probably strip those down to like 4 artists at this point. Mobius, Mézières, Topi.
Dave,
maybe.
Bringing out the Albert Dorn.
Oh, yeah, look at that. So I ended up, I have a whole collection of military books for equipment. If I have to draw something like that, I have a ton of books on drawing anatomy, which I obviously have never studied too carefully. I have books on architecture if I need strange buildings or whatever inspirational stuff for that. But it's all organized in that regard. But again, I probably don't need it now. Most of the time, the advantage of the books is that the pictures are really sharp, and the stuff off the web is not so sharp.
Yeah.
But for comic books, for what we do, what I do, it's usually sharp enough to count. And then I have stuff like this sitting around. When I have to, when I have to draw Thor and Ragnarok, I need a good skull to model from. And this is a skull from an aquarium, or it's an aquarium. I don't know what you'd call it. Something you would put in the aquarium for the fish to swim in and out of. So, but it was actually a very nice skull. So I got it. It was cheap and a lot cheaper than buying a real skull. So. I have a lot of books in that regard, and I have a lot.
It depends on how you get the skull.
Oh well, that would be true. I bought this one honestly, guys. Honestly, it's not a real skull. It's just a.
It looks properly aged.
Yeah, it does. It looks nice. It was never in an aquarium, but most of the books I've got in here, I probably could really get rid of a lot of them. I feel terrible trying to do that, but I may eventually because again the references. So much easier to find, so much quicker to find on the web. I could usually find what I'm looking for. I had to do some horses recently, I'm drawing a combination goat horse. It's kind of hard to explain, and but I went looking for horses, and I needed it. It's got to be flying, so I went and looked at horses, like jumping horses, stuff like that, steeplechases, things of that sort to get up. It's like John Buscema apparently on the backs of the page. Well, you've seen the backs of the pages. Has all this beautiful stuff, but he would when he was doing running figures, running superheroes. I'd heard, never talked to John about it, but I had heard that he would look at reference on skaters.
Yeah, also one of baseball players for throwing a punch.
You find what you can use.
Yeah, he would use Sports Illustrated for a lot of the combat stuff.
Right. So that's where, a lot of these books came from the old days when I was really collecting stuff for reference. Partly it came out of, one of the Metal Men I did. Involved one of them Marty wrote involved Stonehenge, and I was living probably in Queens by then, and I could not find a picture of Stonehenge in my book. I didn't have any books at the time. I had a few here and there. Could not find a picture of Stonehenge. Search and search. I finally found there was a dictionary back there, maybe the American Heritage Dictionary, some dictionary that they gave it wide white margins. And they would put little illustrations and photographs in the margins. And lo and behold, for Stonehenge, there's a picture that's probably an inch across and about an inch high of Stonehenge, which for the comic book was enough for me to be able to figure out what to do with it. But so I drew it, but we drew it complete. We didn't draw it as a wreck. And I don't know, a couple of weeks later, no more than that. I don't know if this is your experience as well. I find that if I need reference on something, I can't find it and I have to fake it. I will find it.
I was like, you know what? People aren't necessarily going to. There are people that will cross-reference and want to check it out, but ultimately, it's a story. It's not a photographic journey. So
no, but I find myself my own drawings are better if I have something to look at. They're better if I'm not faking. Just the drawing itself to me looks better. And the annoying thing on that story is that I went to the Strand bookstore in New York. I used to go there all the time when I lived in the city, and I ended up going down to maybe in the basement. And they used to have Time Life. Time Life used to have a series of books. They don't anymore. It's all visual stuff now. But they had a series of books, and they would have. They were simple to read. There'd be a chapter in wide lettering, wide type, big type, and then there'd be a photographic essay, and then a chapter and a photographic essay. And they had one on the development of the emergence of man, I think it was called. And I found most of those volumes there. I just bought them all. But one of the volumes is the Neolithic Culture of England, or whatever it was called. I opened it up, the last photographic essay in the book, 10, 12, 15 photographs. Stonehenge in the dawn. Stonehenge at night.
Right on time.
Stonehenge overhead. Stonehenge from below.
Man.
Stonehenge in the rain. Stonehenge in bright sun. I was like, oh no! Oh, but I bought it. I've never had to draw Stonehenge ever since. But the book is right up there on the bookshelf. I know exactly where it is. If I ever have to draw Stonehenge again, I'm golden.
I made a deal with myself. I said, if I can use this for like just one reference shot, I'll buy it. I'll pay for it, because I had bought so many books, and I have a huge collection. I have to buy another bookshelf this week. But I that was a new thing. I was like, unless you can actually use this, you can't buy it. It's just too much.
Yeah, but I'm extremely good at rationalizing how I'm going to be able to use it. So that doesn't really help me very much.
You never know when you're going to need the most obscure reference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then the question becomes, can I find that reference?
I tell you, moving has cured me of buying books.
Oh, yeah.
I had like 4 bookcases full of books at one point, and it's now down to 1 bookcase. You can't do it. It's
very wise. That's very wise, and you don't need them as much. I mean, for reference, anyway.
Yeah.
Dave, that came out great.
Yeah, it came out really well. Look at that letter.
I like the nod to Walt there on the knee guard.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to go full Walt because Walt's Walt.
Well, there's only one person who can do that, so yeah, right.
But I wanted to throw something in there. So.
Nice, very nice.
Here's Jeff's. Wow, Jeff, you fully inked that, huh?
Well, yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I use light table action.
Beautiful.
I think maybe I should retire.
Please.
Here's
Cool.
Oh, the Warriors 3, nice.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I wanted Errol Flynn in there, basically.
Right.
Well,
that was kind of how Jack drew him originally.
If there's a way that Dan can draw a barbarian in any of these,
he'll fit it in. As for sure.
Yeah. Speaking of which, this was one of my favorite covers for Conan. Such a cool cover. I mean, just insanely powerful, and that is a terrifying owl. I mean, look at that thing. I mean,
you want to hear the story about that?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd love to.
I have that's one of the few pieces of mine I have up in the front hall. Well, just in the house. I don't hang most of my stuff because I see it. So I prefer to have other artists up in the house.
I'm the same way. I don't have any of my art up really.
But I have this one up because it annoys me. So
it annoys you?
Yes, it annoys me. It annoys me because I think it was 82. I was working in a studio. We had a studio downtown in Midtown in West 29th Street between 7th and 8th Avenues. And the members at the time, they're probably Chaikin, Jim Sherman, Frank Miller, and me. And Wheezy was editing at Marvel at the time. And we got it. We were married by then, living together, and we up on the West Side. So I went up to the studio. She went off to work. Marvel was on Park Avenue South back then, which is just across town from where my studio was. And she calls me up. I get to the studio, and she calls me up almost immediately. And it turns out she has like 8 books going out that week, that day, including a couple of annuals, just a lot of pages. And somehow the cover for Conan has fallen through the cracks. And she doesn't have one. So she says, can you do a cover of Conan for me and get it over here today so we can get it colored, dressed, and out of the house? And I said, well, whatever I was working on, I don't know what I was working on in 82, Star Slammers maybe. And I said, well, if you can talk to Virginia Ramita and it's okay with her. Virginia was the schedule keeper, and she was great, but she was tough.
Oh, I know.
So you get Virginia to okay this, I'll do it. So Wheezy, she's got along with Virginia really well. She called me back in 5 minutes and said, Virginia says it's okay, go. I said, all right, what's in the issue? She says, well, it's Conan. He's fighting a bunch of demons. There's a this demon. There's a that demon. There's an owl demon. I said, okay, fine. I don't have to know anymore. So I got to work. I drew that cover. I penciled in a couple of hours. I inked it in probably 2 hours. It's a mixture of brush, crow quill pen, and technical pen up on the feathers, but you can't see behind the trade dress mostly. But
great
I
too.
got the whole thing done in just as fast as I possibly could. That's why it annoys me, because I haven't done many covers I like better, and it just came out just such a good job. Of other covers I've labored over, I've just killed myself to do, and when you're done, you go, well, that's okay.
Look at that thing.
But this cover. So I ran over to Marvel. It was like 6, across town blocks, about 5-6 blocks away. I got it in, and I gave it to Wheezy. They had it colored that after, in a minute. Probably what's got that big green background, like just a green background. That'll be fine. And colored the figures. It was, pretty simple. And it went out of the house, and it made shipping. So it did the job it was supposed to do. But it still annoys me that I did that. Oh, well, I kind of like, those are my 2 Conan.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great one too. I mean, that look on Conan's face is like perfect. That's just a fantastic piece.
I was as much as I could without doing the kind of rendering. I was trying to do John Buscema's Conan.
At
least in the head.
That would be cool to see you do finishes on a John Buscema issue of Conan. That would have been something.
I've seen John's layouts.
Yeah.
It would be too scary to do. I admired Tom Palmer because Tom was just phenomenal at realizing that stuff. But John, it's all there, but so much of it's there by implication.
Yeah. I was like Tony Tazugna on him was my favorite. I thought Savage sort of Conan issues where he used a lot of zipatone, but he had a real tough, like his brushwork was perfect. It was like brutal, but it was also delicate.
Yes.
It was a very.
It was like his early Jonah Hex stories he did.
Yeah.
They just felt like the sand. I feel like you had sand in your mouth when you read those stories.
Yeah. That really had a big impact. And all this, the varied patterns and textures he would use. The only person I thought that used as much zipatone in such a fun way was Terry Austin.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Terry could use a lot of zip.
Yeah.
Did nice work. He inked me a couple times. He did a black and white job for Wheezy at Warren. She was at Warren still in the late 70s. And,
did Terry ink this? No, you inked that. I don't think he inked that. Maybe he did. Look at
that's Terry. That's from the Viking story.
Yeah, so maybe that is him.
I think that's probably Terry. I'd have to see more of the job. I could tell more of the job, but I think it's probably Terry there.
He's very reverent to the style because if you look at Thor's cheekbones there, that's very unusual.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
For
so
him.
I think that probably was one of Terry's issues. I'd have to look at.
Try to get Terry on.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
We didn't bring this up. There's some. I remember last time I actually spoke to you. I think in person, you were showing me some Elric stuff that you had done.
Right.
And I was looking at this full size. How many artist editions have they made of your work at this point?
I'm not certain. They haven't done Elric, so he's not one of the ones they've done.
But I mean, there's been so many. What do they call these artist editions?
Artist editions. Well, each company, IW put them out first. And they call them artist editions.
Yeah,
they did well enough that a lot of other companies, I think, DC licensed them out to Bob Chapman for a while. Dark Horse has done a couple. Nick Marucci put one out.
Yeah,
for Dynamic. Maybe more than one. I know the one.
The Battlestar Galactica one here.
And Titan did one. So I've had 2 Thors. I've had Manhunter and others. Manhunter Other Stories, which is about my early DC work, also IW. Battlestar Galactica from Nikki. Alien from Titan. And that's 5. There might be one more. Oh, Star Wars. Star Wars came out a few months ago. Well, maybe last year now. The Star Wars stuff I did with Tom Palmer.
I was looking at all the Thor stuff because that was, I had gotten into comics and I read the Metal Men stuff. That was one of the first comics my dad ever bought for me. My dad loved your work. He was an art director. He loved your work, Joe Kubert and Neil Adams and John Buscema. Those were all his favorites. And
I'm not sure I should be in that crowd, but I'm very honored.
He loved the stuff, and it was interesting to see as you look at the Thor run, and then you look at your Ragnarok run, and there's very few artists that just keep improving, getting better and better and better as they go. Like Joe, the only other one I can think of is like Joe Kubert, just never stopped improving and getting better.
No, his stuff was always fabulous.
No, and it's great to see. I mean, you know, it just tells me how much you just love drawing.
Thank you. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm very grateful. I tend to think of what I do now is I put in more lines. And it's really annoying because, you know, as an artist, when you get older, you're supposed to simplify.
Yeah, usually it degenerates a little bit. But
I haven't done that. I seem to be putting in more lines. You know, I look at one of the old pages of Thor. I look at one of the new pages of Ragnarok. Mm-hmm. And the number of lines I use in Ragnarok would probably cover half an issue of Thor. Back in the old days, I could use that number of lines.
Easily.
But it's fun to do. I like the story. It's fun to do. I am just way slower. I mean, probably it's more lines. I will say that Elric stuff, the one that you showed, the 4 issues, just because, you know, Mike, we'd worked together before on a Michael Moorcock's Multiverse.
I remember that. That was gorgeous work.
And well, that was like Mike wrote a completely insane plot. It was like 3 stories that braided together, and they all came in at the end in one unit. And but the layout, the stories, especially one I was doing, was just completely nuts. And I wanted the layouts to reflect that. Usually I want the layouts that I do to develop out of the story, so that for example, that the Manhunter stories, Archie and I were doing 20-page stories roughly in 8 pages. So there are a lot of panels. I've got 15, 16 panel pages. And I learned to cram everything down and make it. And it worked pretty well most of the time. I was able to get it. But when I did the silent story, that would have been 8 pages. But when it became silent, I couldn't fit that many panels on a page. I needed you to be able to see the gestures. I needed to be able to see the compositions in a way that wasn't necessary so much in the original, where I had all the dialogue to kind of cover stuff.
Jeff went to instead of doing this cover, he wanted to do that scene in Star Slammers when they're using all their it's like kind of a collective mind.
Oh yeah,
the silver mind.
Yeah. So Jeff was pretty ambitious, and I think he went from 100 panels to 1 panel.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, as much as I wanted to draw that scene, there was just no way. It was just too much.
Well, I was very flattered. John Byrne stole it in the Fantastic Four, which he readily admitted. It was not like I'm revealing trade secrets.
Trial of Galactus or something.
That's right, and that's where he got the idea from. He said, but then I stole one of his ideas. He had the idea to do an all splash page issue, and did it, which eventually came out in Marvel. What was that called? Milgram edited the book. Alan edited the book. Not Marvel Age, Marvel Saga, Fanfare. Marvel Fanfare. Yeah. And I hadn't seen it at that time. I knew John had done it. Mm-hmm. But when I was doing Thor, I was getting toward the end of my run, and he was going to be getting off. And I had a big fight with Jormungand, the Midgard Serpent, and Thor were going to fight.
Yeah,
and
that stuff was amazing.
I had like several months, right? That was coming up, and I was thinking about, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to show this giant fight? Because one of the problems I give myself as a writer all the time, it's really annoying, is I have little tiny guys fighting giant guys. And so there's a problem in composition, there's a problem in storytelling, and in Midgard Serpent, that's like the worst. So I debated about, and I wanted it to seem like a big fight. So I ended up trying to figure out, well, I could show the fight, and then I could cut away to a subplot. So you'd have a subplot going on. Then I come back to the fight, and that would seem like more's going on. Like the fight continues while you're in the subplot. But that way you'd cut away 3 or 4 times, make it seem like it's longer than it really is, because I only had 22 pages back then to do it. And ultimately, we were eating at a Mexican restaurant in New York, a block from our house on 70th Street in Columbus, from our apartment. And we were stepping out the door. And it's the only time I can ever remember this happen. Well, one other time, really the only time I ever remember happening. Stepping across the threshold as we were leaving. And it really was like a light bulb went off over my head. And I went, all splash pages. I could do all splash pages. And then, I don't know that I was thinking about John's job, but he had done his job by then. So maybe I was in there in the filter somewhere. and I decided that I would write all the captions in really bad Norse poetry. I didn't mean for it to be bad, but I'm sure it's just bad. But the thing about that is that when I read poetry, I have to almost read it out loud. I read it slowly. I can't read poetry. I can't zip through it the way I can zip through prose. And so I thought, well, if anybody bothers to read the captions, it'll slow them down, because I'm only going to have 22 panels. Now, in the end, I abased myself before Jim Shooter. I didn't really, but I did talk to Jim, and I think there are actually 24 pages in that story, which means they had to drop an ad page and maybe a letters column or something like that. It was a letter column for sure, maybe the bullpen page. They wouldn't want to drop the ads. And so the upshot was that I was able to do 24 pages and do the whole thing. So and it worked out. That one worked out well, but I wasn't sure going into it. I spent a couple of months thinking about it before I suddenly had the idea and was able to take that.
I remember that issue. One of the things I loved about it when I first read it was the sense of scale you were able to get, because there are still a bunch of small drawings of Thor fighting a giant serpent.
Oh yeah,
you would never have been able to do that if you hadn't done splash pages.
No, that's right. That was part of the reason for the solution worked so well. So I just thought, I mean, in real life and mythological life, the serpent encircles the world. It's big enough. It's under the oceans. Right. And it actually goes all the way around the world. It's kind of hard to draw a human-sized figure fighting something that's quite that large. So, like, if you look at the first page, I gave him a pretty large head, but the rest of his tail and body, they go off over past the horizon. So rather than trying to make him gigantic in every way, I just said, well, you can't see the rest of them. It's off over there beyond the horizons. But it did work out. That one worked out. But I seem to get, as a writer, I seem to give myself those problems all the time. With a big thing fighting a small thing.
Well, I mean, that's kind of what the whole idea of a hero is supposed to do, especially if you're doing Norse stuff. It's always the gigantic monster that they're fighting.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it is. That's why I should probably do something besides the Norse mythology.
Right.
I should pack it in. Oh, somebody asked, I see questions coming up on my side. Has Walt done portfolio reviews?
You did one for me. I have 2 portfolio reviews you did for me.
Oh my God!
You did the first one, and I brought in inking samples, and you asked. There were some samples over Mark Bright, and so Mark Bright's pencils were pretty complete. So me inking them, it wasn't too difficult. And you asked me what book I was working on. And I didn't have professional Marvel or DC work, and then you made a call to Ralph Macchio. I didn't know if you were going to make it, and you made it, and it started my career at Marvel. But so about 3 years later, I showed you my penciling samples at a comic book show. I was so proud. I think it was Profit Unleashed. And you looked at them and you gave me a very honest critique, but it was a complete opposite critique of the first one. But I listened to everything you said, but I looked at the pages differently. I'm like, oh, I guess, well, this is garbage. And I really have to literally go back to the drawing board. But it was incredibly helpful. And there's so much insight there just as far as like, well, vary the shapes and of the figures and the panels, because you've repeated just the figure size so much, and so much of it was just like, but it was definitely an eye opener. But do you do a lot of portfolio reviews at shows, or
I don't get people coming up to me that much at shows looking for portfolio reviews now. My guess is that the young guys who want portfolio reviews have no idea who the hell I am, largely. I did a lot of them in the old days at conventions, and I will still do one. I get somebody come up, maybe 1 or 2 guys in the course of a day, and I'll use if I can kind of hold my line for a little bit. Usually, I do free head sketching, so a lot of people get in line for a free sketch. So that's kind of how that works. I mean, I ask for donations to Hero Initiative. People do a great job. I mean, they're very generous. It's very kind. I just do head sketches these days. It's pretty quick ones. Oh, the phone is ringing.
Oh, it's Joe Quesada. He wants back in.
Oh, I know who it is. I'm not answering it. I'll call him back. I don't know if I can turn this phone off so the message won't come through either.
Here, we're going to...
Oh, maybe so. Maybe that did it. I may have cut the call off, or who knows what I just did. But I would do portfolio reviews. Usually in a portfolio review, I try to give whoever I'm reviewing 1 or 2 things to work on if they need work, if they're not doing professional work. Because if they have 40 things to work on, they're never going to remember 40 things. Just not going to happen. So I try to give a couple different things that would actually work. Oh, let me just toss it down here. It stopped the ring, but the guy's still talking. So what happened was, and then I'll try and find a couple things I like about it and add those to it. But I won't try and cover everything if it's a lot of stuff to do. But I did end up teaching at the School of Visual Arts in 1992, and there you go. There's a big head and a small figure. Yeah, and I will say I got some of that from Philippe Drouillet, the French artist who did such beautiful work back in the 70s and 80s. He's probably still working actually, but I haven't seen so much of his stuff lately. He did The Adventures of Lone Sloan. He did a lot of incredibly cosmic stuff. It was just great. Apparently the pages were enormous. They were gigantic. John Workman, so he brought some into the office, had to turn sideways to get through the door on some of them. They were just, or so it seemed. So he had a lot of room to do big stuff. But I taught at Visual Arts over a 20-year period. I taught about 11 and a half years there. Eventually I reached a point where my class was all portfolio review. I had the students do assignments. They'd bring them in the next week, and we'd tape them up around the wall of the room, and I would critique them. And usually it was the same assignment. After you kind of looked at them and began talking about them, you could begin to see some of the same elements in different ones that needed work. You kind of develop a thread really in the discussion. It was a very seat of your pants kind of session. Klaus Jansen was teaching. Klaus had a gigantic syllabus, and it was a very very nuts and bolts, which was great. So I think we kind of complement each other. But it's hard to say how much the students got out of it. I did do a pretty free-form class, but it was fun to do. Eventually, I decided. After 20 years, about 5 years ago now, 6 years maybe, I decided that kind of what the style that I did, whatever it is that I do, I didn't know would really help these students, the new students, get work in professional comics. Editors change, styles change, all that stuff. Old stuff disappears, new stuff comes up. It's like seeing Will Eisner's work. I always enjoyed Eisner's work, but the later books he did always looked like really old 40s type stuff. And I kind of feel that's probably true of my work.
No, I wouldn't say that. I think it's better than ever. It's beautiful stuff.
Well, thank you. I just felt that I wasn't going to be able to explain to the students really what modern editors were looking for. I hadn't worked at Marvel or DC much in a long time. I still do variant covers. Occasional job. About a year and a half ago, I did a Commandy challenge issue for Didio. And I drew it, and that was a lot of fun. I kind of like Commandy, and not my favorite Kirby work at DC. I'm a Fourth World guy. That's why I love doing Orion.
Oh, Orion was sweet.
We couldn't give that book away, but I love doing it, and I would have done that for another 3 years. I had 5 years of stories I wanted to do, so I wish we could have gone, but I think they were trying to give that book away at the end, and I think I got a free ride the last few issues. They were very generous, let me kind of wrap everything up and at least kind of get to an ending in the story. But it was fun. I love doing those characters. I love those characters. So they almost might be my favorite Kirby characters, really. Frank Miller once said when we were talking, hanging out in the studio, he thought that the Fourth World stuff, that was really the first independent comics. And because they were so personal, and you could make that argument as far as I'm concerned.
That's that makes sense.
Amazing. So it was cool.
Hey, well, speaking of Frank, I heard somewhere that there's a Daredevil story out there that he wrote that you were drawing. Is that true?
I never drew it. It was. We were going to do one. That is true. This is years and years ago. What happened was. Whoever had been doing the book, I've forgotten who it was now. Ralph, I think was the editor, Ralph Macchio. Whoever was doing the book got off the book, and so Ralph was grabbing fill-ins from here and there to run for a while, and he got hold of Frank and me, and I'd love to draw a Frank Miller story. I'd love to draw a Frank Miller story. So I said, sure, I whatever it is, I don't care. So Frank wrote a script. I think it's out there in the web now. And it's Doctor Strange co-stars. And it's really about a serial killer with some magic thrown in. And he turned in the first script. I got it. And I thought it was fantastic. I couldn't wait to start. And then Ralph found somebody to take over the book regularly. And the new writer wanted to start working immediately. He wanted his work to start coming out as fast as possible. So Ralph asked Frank and me if we could put our issue on hold for a little bit while this kind of got started. And then somewhere down the road, we'd be doing it. In the event, the new writer only lasted a few issues. I don't know what was going on there. But by the time Ralph could have used the Daredevil, Frank was doing, I'm going to say Dark Knight. I could be wrong. Might have been Ronin. I don't think it was Ronin. I think it was Dark Knight the first thing he did after Ronin.
He did Ronin. He went from Daredevil to Ronin at the same time he was doing that series that Lynn colored, The Big Electra Lives. But it took him,
right.
Yeah.
Then,
he didn't finish it until way later.
So I'm thinking that probably it was Dark Knight that Frank got onto. And I got onto X Factor with Wheezy. And so by the time Ralph could use us to do stuff, we were both pretty busy. And so the story never happened. And as far as I know, I thought Frank had plotted the second issue, but I can't find any trace of that in my own notes or my own files. And Frank doesn't remember doing that, so I'm not sure that ever actually happened.
It looks like you have detailed files as well, from what we can tell.
What's that?
Looks like you have detailed files.
Well, I keep a lot of crap. When I move out of the house, it'll all go away. Get a dumpster and just file all that stuff in there.
Oh, breaks my heart.
But it was. I was sorry not to do it. I would love to have done it. I just I love doing the RoboCop Terminator. Frank and I did that together. Frank called me up in 1990. I was just leaving Marvel, didn't have much to do, hadn't maligned much stuff up, but I just felt that my time at Marvel had kind of run out, and it was time to go think about other stuff. And right when that happened, Frank called and said he was going to do a limited series for Dark Horse, RoboCop versus the Terminator. Did I want to draw it? And I said, I'd be thrilled to draw it. Not only was I thrilled to find the job, but I was thrilled to draw one of Frank's stories. So we did it. I'm really pleased at how that came out. I thought there was some really funny stuff, some real black humor, some good fights. If I could do it, I would go back and I would redraw my very first big drawing of RoboCop. Didn't feel I caught what I wanted to catch. I got better at it as I went along, as I usually do. But it's still, the overall story was great. And there's one scene I still love where RoboCop bursts into some penthouse. Some terrorist is there. I don't remember what was going on. He's got loaded with dynamite all over his body. And he's going to count down but RoboCop doesn't leave. And RoboCop just walks up to him and the guy just, pushes the button. He's going to blow up in 3 seconds or whatever. RoboCop walks over and grabs him by the front of his shirt, holds him back, and fires him out over into the sky off the building. He blows up several hundred yards outside off the building up in the sky. It was hysterically funny, but of course I'm cruel. So I thought it was really funny. It was great. It was such a great bit. And the whole thing was really nicely done. I just so enjoyed doing that book. So that was fun. So I wish we could go back and do the Daredevil, but I think that probably isn't going to happen. But it would have been fun to do.
Well, Walt, it's been this might be the longest show we've ever had. But
I never shut up. That's why they're problem is.
It's in a fantastic way because there's never any dead time. It was perfect. And I don't know. You probably had it with us. Probably.
No, I just hope people listening aren't bored. I mean, some of these stories I have told before.
I you offended Joe Quesada on some level.
Yeah, he blew us off. I know. It's too bad. I feel bad. But you know what it was? I just had an email or a Facebook message from some guy who got a sketch from me in 96 or sometime a long time ago, which I do not remember. I remember the sketch. I don't remember the guy, but he said that he was there, and when he was there, Joe came up to my table to see if he could get me to go out to one of the bars and get some drinks. And as it happens, I don't drink, so I did. I'm sure I declined. So maybe that was it. Maybe that's why Joe blew me off here tonight.
We've had every episode we try to get him to cry. It's a bit of a bully. We've almost
Thank you for hosting me.
Yeah, it'd be great. It'd be great if you wanted to ever come back. I had tons of questions I wanted to ask you about all kinds of stuff.
He's kind of quiet. He's usually he's got he's probably got your tons of questions, right?
Okay,
I do. So
you want to sneak in one more question before I'm gone?
Yeah.
Well, just a quick one. I remember
Jeff
when I when I worked at there you go. This is it. So when I worked at CrossGen, I remember you did that issue of The Path. And I'd always wondered, like, have you ever done 2-page spread designs before?
Excuse me.
Not as a comic book. I mean, I've done double-page spreads occasionally, but never as a comic book where the whole thing is the comic is in the double-page spreads. That was brand new.
I remember you did such a. I had trouble with that because that was some of the standard for some of those books, and it was. I thought it was brutal, but you came up with such great designs, and you really layered the panels well. And I remember seeing all that stuff being like, this guy's a goddamn genius.
Well, I don't know about that. I did steal the Bayou Tapestry. The book was like a fill-in, although it was in the storyline that who wrote that book? Ron
Mars.
Mars wrote it. It was in the thing that Ron wrote. And it's essentially there's a Viking character in feudal Japan. And it was the story of that character. It was that character's backstory.
Mm-hmm.
And so there isn't any Norse art that's really survived. There are, remains of post holes from structures, stuff like that. As far as drawing or painting or whatever they were doing, there isn't any.
I got to get this.
Right after, about the end of the Viking era, 1066, when William the Conqueror invaded from Normandy, invaded England. He won. The Normans invaded England and won, and he had a tapestry put together, made that was a celebration of his victory. It's over in France, Bayeux maybe, I presume, and it's 200 feet long. One of the ends is not complete. I think it was destroyed maybe, but I'm not sure. But it was it's a fabulous tapestry. And the Normans were really the Norsemen. They were Viking descendants who put up in France and were given some of the land to they were given the land so that by the kings of France or rulers of France, so that they would stop other Vikings from coming in and invading. They were the buffer against that stuff, and they took the lands. So the ships in the Bayeux Tapestry are dragon ships, and they're really, I kind of view that if Vikings had left art, it would look like this. I'm not sure it really would, but it would look like this. And the tapestry is 200 feet long, and it's like a comic book. It's image after image after image with copy I forgot, Untitled maybe, in Latin probably, that explains King William's victory over King Harold. And so when I had Wolf tell the story, the first few pages are just straight pages of the two of them getting together, and then Wolf telling his friend, I've forgotten his name now, he's the main guy in the path. And once he begins telling the story, I began using the Bayeux Tapestry as the model for what I was drawing and for the kind of figure work I was doing for the ships. And I sold it shamelessly. I think I put it in 3 rows because it was because it had, just you could have cut them out and put them all together and made a long strip out of it if you wanted to.
Oh, it's practically animates. It's so smooth.
Well, whoever lettered it, the mostly computer lettering to me looks like it's laid on top of the art. And I think in the front and back where it's the regular stuff, it kind of looks like that. I mean, it's not bad, but it looks a little like that. Whoever lettered this and then laid the balloons, that laid the captions in, did a really beautiful job. And so I think they chose some lettering that was similar to the Bayeux font, similar to the Bayeux Tapestry, and laid it in rather beautifully. It does not interfere with the art. It feels like it's part of the drawing. And what I did do was I changed from, gotta have to go back and look, I don't remember now. I changed from either pen inking to brush inking or from brush inking to pen inking. You can't really see much difference. But I thought that, when I went to Japan, it became more brush. That's why I use brush in Japan. So it starts off as pen, ends up as brush. So there's a lot of stuff in there that nobody had any idea I was doing. But, what do we all do? We amuse ourselves. And that's what I was trying to do. So I enjoyed doing that. There were 2 things about that I loved. One was apparently somebody in production, I heard this probably from Ron, apparently came in there and he went, oh my God, he's doing the Bayeux Tapestry.
Oh.
Which I thought was awesome. And then I read a review on the web of the comic, where the guy just lamented the fact that my drawing had so gone to hell.
Because he just didn't get it.
Meanwhile, I'm looking at that, and I'm like, now I have to find that issue. I never knew you did it.
Yeah,
I think it's issue number 5, isn't it?
Yeah, issue number 5. Yep.
Yeah, issue 5.
I'll be picking it up.
They did do a reprint of several issues. I think it's in the reprint as well, but I don't know about that for sure.
It's in that first trade paperback.
Mike Atiyeh colored it, and I will say the cover of that issue. It's a samurai helmet sitting in the tall reeds with a Viking sword driven down through the crown, pinning it to the ground. And Mike Atiyeh did the coloring. That cover is one of the best covers I ever did because the coloring is one of the best jobs of coloring I ever had. He even added it's raining, and he added just a little trace of blood on the sword blade that I had not put there in the drawing. There it is. And it was just enough, kind of almost like a rust color, to suggest it without being over the top. And I just thought it was just a beautiful job. I was so pleased by that cover.
Yeah, Mike's good.
Let me show it here.
It was fun. But the whole story was fun to do. And it was just fun to do the value tapestry.
Yeah, it was amazing. Well, thanks for answering that question, because I remember I'd always been a fan, and that was something, it was so cool to see you stretch and do this new thing and do it so effortlessly.
Well, you're a phenomenal designer. It's just hard to imagine you would have trouble. I figure if I can figure that, anybody can figure that stuff out.
I know. The 2-page spreads is it's a tough hill to climb.
Well, it was. What I did do is I enjoyed it because it was different, and that made it. It was kind of an interesting challenge trying to figure out. And actually, it fit into the Bayou Tapestry idea just perfectly. I couldn't have asked for better on that. Yeah. So I lucked out on that score.
Well, Walt, anytime you'd like to come back, we'd love to have you. Just hit me up or hit any of us up, and we'd love to have you back because we're not kidding around. We have so many questions, and it's great hearing these stories, and people don't get to hear them. Just the backstories of all these great issues that you've brought us over the years. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. Somewhere down the road when you run out of gas, give me a call and we'll do it again.
We'll do.
I'd be happy to do it.
All right.
Probably when I do it next time, my beard will be shorter. I think I'll probably be out of this phase by then. But,
guys, can we vote? Can we get Joe out and just replace him with Walt?
Yeah. Seems reasonable.
That'd probably be bad. That would probably just be talking all the time and would just trample over your guests. That wouldn't be so good.
Actually, I think my beard actually grew longer during this project.
I'm sure it did.
I heard you being there.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. I've had a lot of fun.
All right, well, thanks.
Appreciate it.
Nice drawings, too, guys. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
All right. How do I get out of here now? Close the window?
Leave
For my trap forever.
Ben, take over. Do your magic.